Coming up on this episode of Belief Hole.
He is the guy, the Count of St Germain, shrouded in mystery, even in historical texts.
With this character, it takes you into the idea of the masters of the hidden brotherhood, which is this council of light that guides humanity through time and basically is there in key moments to push people in certain directions.
For good or ill?
For the good of humanity, according to them.
According to them. That has never sounded good, though.
Right. We'll get there. Sacrifices must be made! This harkens back to the enigmatic, mysterious figure of the signing of the independence, who, in his speech, made references to the Great Seal, the Eye of God, these things that would come to pass as being symbols of America. Is this the symbols of this ancient brotherhood carrying through the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians,
right,
that supposedly our Count St Germain was a part of?
A woman had in fact leapt from his balcony. She was terrified. The woman ranted that she had jumped to escape St. Germain, who had bitten her neck.
Well, that all sounds made up. That sounds nothing like the Count de St Germain that we discuss all the time.
That's true.
He traded his grass-dew elixir of life for prostitute blood?
Prostitute blood.
Totally changes his character as far as, like, he was a charming guy who...
Well, he was he charmed her and then he bit her. But alchemy, I mean, is there any truth to this, though?
Well, if you look at the alleged reincarnation of this guy in the 1970s, you can watch YouTube clips of him doing alchemy. He later killed himself in a van.
Okay, well, now you're jumping the gun here. So the question is, who was this guy? Was he just another part of the Continental Congress, some guy they didn't recognize that was shrouded in mystery because he hadn't shut up enough for anyone to know who he was? That seems unlikely. What does seem likely, as I would put forth, is that he was likely an immortal Freemason vampire.
Yes.
Shuttled over the oceans by Benjamin Franklin.
It's not that far of an idea.
Right. No, and as we will suggest here, it's damn likely.
It's most likely.
Yeah.
Conspiracy.
Synchronicity. Sasquatch. Homunculus. Alien races. Satanism in Hollywood. MK Ultra. Tartaria.
There's like a whole... I've been watching this one guy that...
Close the door, Jury! Close your door!
What's the...
Inner Earth Disagreements.
Ghost Dad.
I like that movie.
Dogman. Bohemian Grove. Corey Feldman. Magicians are demons. Specters and spirits. Sleep paralysis. Strange disappearances. Sky whale phenomena. Yes! Alternative history. Shadow people. Shh, quiet, I'm trying to say words with the mouth. It's getting dicey out there. Poltergeists.
That's cool.
Anunnaki. What is the moon? Elf towers.
I would never talk about it. That's old. Y2K.
Cover-ups. Apocalyptic catastrophe. Vampire.
Well, hello.
Welcome back to another episode of Belief Hole.
I'm Jeremy.
I'm Chris.
John, we are here for your entertainment.
That's
solely.
right. And also your education, right?
You could argue that.
Yeah.
We're mostly here to help your soul ascend.
Yeah, that is actually the main reason we're here.
We are all about ascension.
John the Ascender. Remember when you thought that was going to be your
We've talked
destiny?
about this.
John is no longer
Multiple
here.
times.
See, what happened
I
was...
still think it could happen.
I think it did happen. In 2012, what happened is your soul ready for ascension has left us, and we're left with this husk,
I know.
husk of a soul.
This is kind of like a portion of what I used to be.
Yeah, we got a bum deal.
The good stuff left, and we got the guy who's still working on stuff. Right? Isn't that the theory of ascending?
You're fighting words.
No. I mean, then what's the point of me being here
That's a
if
good
all
point.
the good parts are gone?
Well, the good part got to go, but then there's another fraction that's still got to get through it.
Yeah, we have to suffer through that guy.
We are all the leftovers that have to level up to the next ascension, which is coming.
I'm here to help, is what we're saying.
It's coming today.
Today you will ascend.
And if you ascend, the first thing I'm doing is parkour.
Oh, really? Wait, what? If I ascend, that's what you're doing?
I meant to say me.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. I thought you meant like if we left, you'd have a lot more free time. We weren't doing the show, so you'd just really learn parkour.
If I died and I went to heaven, I would do parkour first thing.
Like high five Jesus, like past the pearly gates. See, I'll catch up with you
If
later.
anyone doesn't know what parkour is, look up Storer.
I think everybody knows. Did you've known what it is, right?
known
You
what
didn't
it is
just
for
find
a-
out.
No.
Okay.
But
That'd be funny.
I've watched hours of it at this point.
That is interesting.
It is one of those things you get into and you just like watch and watch and
It's
watch.
amazing. It blows my mind what they're capable
Yeah.
of with their bodies.
I used to watch those when I was living with you in Austin in 2012, and I used to watch them thinking like I can do this, like I can learn. And I started to I learned the roll, I learned the tuck and roll thing.
It's an aggressive, like hands-on raw sport
Yeah.
being done by like...
Perhaps by immortals.
They seem immortal. Like what they're doing, like you just look
I was
at
going
them.
to tie it into the episode.
Sorry.
Continue.
Go ahead, no.
You're excited. I want to hear more.
I think about how this is all they know, you know, and there's...
They're born and bred on parkour. Didn't go to school.
No, I mean like it's just so natural for them
Right.
when they're doing it, you know, like this is just the way bodies move.
Oh, right.
But like, you know...
It looks easy.
They
'cause
make
do
it look
so well.
so easy. But then it'll contrast with like an old person walking by and they'll be like, oh, that's amazing. And you just imagine this woman is just like, when she was young, no one thought that could potentially
possible.
exist. You know,
Yeah,
right.
That was as far away as the iPhone when she was like 15. That old
Well, it's funny
woman.
because your body,
that old woman.
that poor old lady's body had the technology, but there was
said
no
she was
technique.
poor?
There was no technique. She's poor in spirit because she can't parkour. I think that's valid. I think you can
Poor
say
in
that.
body, not in spirit. She could be a king of spirit.
Yeah, Chris.
Or
No,
queen.
I think if you can't parkour, you're pretty sad,
What?
aren't you?
Spiritually speaking.
I'm okay.
You're right.
Yeah,
you're all right
I can
hanging
just
in there?
watch and enjoy it. But
Okay.
anyways, that was a little bit of a detour.
Well, actually, it ties right into our episode.
Immortality.
Yeah.
It is getting close to 4th of July,
Yes.
right?
It is. Yeah.
And so I wanted to do something related to the founding of the country, right? We're celebrating the independence from Britain, yada, yada, our freedoms, et cetera, et cetera. And
Oh, very good right now too.
yeah, we're all doing great in that department. But first we thought like colonial. What's colonial conspiracy mystery, you know? And then we thought Roanoke, right? The lost colony of Roanoke. This amazing historical mystery, which I've been fascinated with for decades. So we were all prepped to do the show, we're working on it, researching it. And the most interesting tidbit was coming across the famous word carved on the tree. If you guys aren't familiar with it, Roanoke was a colony, the first colony from Britain that came over, established on Roanoke Island. And long story short, the guy, John White, who led the group over, planted them there. They ran out of supplies. They had to go back to Britain. I'm paraphrasing here, but
Yeah.
essentially he came back 3 years later because he got stuck, couldn't get back.
There was a war going on.
There's a war going on with Spain. Anyways, he comes back. The whole village is gone. There's no sign of distress. Weapons are found untouched. Farm implementations,
Just
instruments
left abandoned on the ground.
left abandoned. All the buildings were intact. Some were carefully dismantled, but there was no sign of invasion or anything. There was one word on a tree carved, Croatoan. And another word on another tree was just the letter CRO, which someone obviously didn't have the aptitude to carve the whole word in, or the motivation.
It's a long word. You know, you start on a piece of paper, you're writing happy birthday, and you want to do like all caps, and you get to like happy birthday. And you're like, ah, shit. I should have
It's
stenciled
exactly like that, Chris. Anyways, long story short, the word Croatoan, what's fascinating about it was a ghost ship that crashed into Hatteras Island. The last word on the manifest was the word Croatoan. And Hatteras Island was previously known as Croatoan Island. Anyways, all these myths about the word Croatoan. The last breath breathed by Edgar Allan Poe was the word Croatoan on his deathbed.
there were several things that made the story more fascinating. I mean, it's already interesting because it's a lost colony. To this day, it's still a mystery. But yeah, there was always sprinkled into the story that, Edgar Allan Poe was mumbling Croatoan when he disappeared and came back and was dying.
It was his last words.
Right.
Amelia Earhart, in her diary, last word in her diary was the word Croatoan, the logbook of the ship that crashed. Anyways, it's all bullshit.
Yeah, I was going to say, this isn't the show we're doing.
No.
Sounded interesting.
Yeah, it was fascinating, and that was the exciting thing about it. But I guess the moral of the story is, I traced that back. It's been published in a book by John Land. It's this like fiction book. Some other stuff. History Channel wrote about it. It's been in YouTube videos. I find the original source. It's some blog called Ghost Cities, and the guy had written this really good write-up about the lost colony of Roanoke. But then he added that at the end, which was all these bizarre connections with the word Croatoan. Because essentially, it sounds like it was just creative license. He made it up. But since then, in 2011, people have repeated it on YouTube videos, on the History Channel, and now it's just become like this fact about Roanoke Island, or the lost colony of Roanoke. Unless you look into it and you find out, it seems like someone just made that up and there's no verifiable source. Because the last words of Edgar Allan Poe was, Lord help my poor soul, not Croatoan. So like the one thing that was mysterious and supernatural about that story seems to not be...
But I do want to say, it's still a mysterious story because we don't know exactly what happened. Most people think that they left for the island Croatoan, which is why they wrote it on the tree, because there's a tribe there
Yeah, exactly.
that they were friendly with the same name. They were told by John White to leave X's on the trees.
A cross, Maltese cross.
So it's just them leaving a trail to another tribe.
Yeah, that's what most people believe.
It seems
that's what
pretty
happened.
straightforward that they would have integrated with that tribe, and then that's why later there's been accounts of coming across blonde-haired natives with blue or gray eyes that must have been integrated from previous English colonies.
Right. There's definitely still some interesting things about, like why leave all your tools and weapons? Why not bring those with you to the new island? But for sure, the idea
Maybe
of the
they
word...
didn't take all of them. Maybe they just took a portion of them.
That's true. I mean, maybe a lot of people just... They didn't find any bodies either. That was part of the big mystery. No bodies.
Right.
But, obviously, like over time, people have embellished the story. It's been mixed with fiction. Stephen King had a great book about it called... crap, I can't remember the name of the book right now. No, it was not it. It was not it. It was...
Misery.
Storm of the Century. Which basically is about
Roanoke?
this small New England town, and this guy shows up, kills somebody in the town, and he's in jail. And while he's in there, people start dying. He starts showing up in people's dreams. Basically, you find out he's a demon, this ancient demon whose name I think is Croatoan. And he was responsible for the disappearance of the colony, because what he did to the colony, he did the same to this New England town, which was give me one of your children to take as my apprentice to go basically be a wandering demon, or I'm going to walk you 2 by 2 into the sea, never to be seen again. It was kind of like that.
That's what they did,
Spoiler
right?
alert.
So he just wanted someone to mentor.
Exactly.
I
If
just
you don't want to know,
to teach someone how to demon.
right? If you don't want to know, plug your ears. But his whole town voted for this demon guy to take his son. They all voted against him, including his wife. So,
Ouch.
like at the end of it, they divorce, and he ends up seeing his son like 15 years later in like San Francisco with this demon just walking down an alley, and that's like the end of the book.
Well, I hope no one wants to read the book.
Well, I said spoiler alert a couple times, so
You really needed a strong spoiler.
Anyways, as we tangle ourselves in the weeds and walk into the woods of this episode, I wanted something a little more supernatural, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another kind of supernatural
colonial sort of
intrigue. Yeah, some sort of tidbit that goes to the heart of the founding of the country, because that's what our show is. It's the bizarre. It's the compelling, mysterious aspects to our world. So what, if anything, happened at the beginning of our country? So I remembered hearing a story about a mysterious figure at the signing of the Declaration of Independence. A figure that, had he not been there, the Declaration may not have been signed. So this story I heard was echoing my brain, and I looked more into it, and we're going to recount it here in a moment. But to set it up, this is the Continental Congress, I think it was the second gathering or whatnot, to sign the Declaration of Independence, to break the chains of Britain and say, we are no longer your servants, we are an independent nation. This idea of liberation, of freedom of thought.
well, freedom from tyranny from England.
Right, freedom of
Taxes.
monarchy rule, like all these things.
We
All these-
actually left for less taxes then than we have now, right?
which is insane, yeah. That's a whole other topic.
That's a whole nother show.
But true. But anyways, all of these people, you have, Jefferson, Adams, Benjamin Franklin, the original founders, and all of these people sitting in this room deciding, okay, if I put my name to paper here, if I ink my John Hancock, which is where that term comes from because he's the first to sign largest signature on the Declaration.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know if John Hancock was the first to sign, but he signed the largest. Like if you look at the Declaration of Independence, John Hancock is huge.
I think he was because,
That's a weird phrase to put together.
Hancock is huge.
Yes.
well, in my mind, it was like, if he was the first to sign, it's like when you're signing like a birthday card or you're writing a letter, you start
take it
bigger,
up.
All right.
and then you get slower
It's
and
what
slower.
we just talked
'cause-
about with Croatoan. You don't know how much room there is until you get to the end of the thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. It all ties together, man.
Anyways, you're in the room, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, imagine in post, the music's going to come back in here. So you're in the room. You're wondering, are we going to survive this? We are essentially committing treason against the crown, right?
Right. If we lose the war, we're all going to hang.
Exactly. If there is a war, which there most likely will be, our names are
Can
written
you
in
imagine
paper.
how intense that would be?
So terrifying.
We live in such a sheltered, warm, sack of...
Cocoon, embryotic fluid of a country right now.
I know.
Visual.
Go ahead.
Anyways,
Now I'm sleepy.
so you're in this scary non-embryotic kind of space with all these other old men,
yeah, no air conditioning.
young
for sure.
men, mix of people.
People willing to die.
People willing to die, sign their name, but they weren't initially. This is the supposition, is that people were concerned. There was back and forth. Well, there's talk of scaffolds and gallows and gibbets or whatever.
Gibbets.
Gibbets.
Yeah, that's a thing. I don't know what it means,
Yeah.
but
Gibbets were they're a gallows that when you would hang someone and you'd leave them as a warning hanging on the street. Like, do
Ooh.
not
Oh, yeah.
cross us.
Yeah.
Anyways,
That's a gibbet?
that's a gibbet.
Wow.
Yeah. Interesting, right?
It is
I had to look
interesting.
that up.
a warning like Vlad Dracul would do when he put people on pikes.
Exactly.
I've been piked!
There's a vampire connection.
Get ready for some vampiric action in this one.
Anyway,
John.
so you're in this room and no one's sure. Like there's people that are ready to sign, a lot of people that are hesitant. And what happens? According to lore, according to multiple accounts in history, the interesting mystery folklore of the founding of our country, or the declaring of independence, two accounts that are probably the most well-known. Firstly, the account from George Lippard from 1847 in his book, Washington and His Generals, or Legends of the Revolution. This comes from there. But more recently published in 1928, The Secrets of All Ages. You may have heard of this, John. This is Manly P. Hall.
Sounds familiar.
So he is one of the most referenced Freemasons, authors.
Is he a Freemason himself, or is he just researching
He's a Freemason.
secret societies?
He's a Freemason.
Okay.
He became a Freemason later in life, but he had written many, many works leading into that, into like ancient mysticism and esoteric orders.
Is he friends with Grandpa?
Probably knew Grandpa, because they all know each other. That's the story for another time.
What was it? How high did he get in the order of Mason?
33 degree.
What? He's at 33
Really?
degree.
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
That's as high as it goes, right?
No.
Well, that's the
See,
thing.
What?
This could have been a whole episode on Masons, because this gets into the interesting connections between Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, the Bavarian Illuminati.
Yeah, we will do a full episode on this, because it really, I was not expecting this with this topic, with this certain character that we're about to pull the curtain back on. But with this character, it takes you into the idea of the Council of Light, or the Masters of the Hidden Brotherhood, which is Blavatsky, which is Theosophy, which is a whole interesting idea that there is this Council of Light that guides humanity through time, and basically is there in key moments to push people in certain directions.
Let me get back to,
For good or ill?
well, they
Well,
would say
it's
for good.
arguable.
They would say for good, but it's
For their good? Or
for the good of humanity, according to them. But it's
That,
made
doesn't
it-
usually,
it's made
that
it-
has never sounded good, though.
Right. We'll get there. So
Sacrifices must be made!
Let me get back to Philadelphia. I feel like this is like this one story is trying to birth itself. So they're all there in the Continental Congress. They're debating whether to sign, and then suddenly a man stands up, a mysterious figure, who gives the final speech encouraging people to sign.
During the moment of hesitation.
Right. Then let's go ahead and read. In Manly P. Hall's work, The Secret of All Ages, he references having read this, even though it's published after an earlier published account by George Lippard. In his account, he says that he actually was shown this information from another Theosophical society with the documents before any congressional record was put into place.
Oh, wow.
Early American speeches, right? Curiosities of history. But regardless, the point is, this is the story, and this has been noted in several different places. Whether it's fact or fiction is yet to be seen, but this is believed by different historians, and especially Theosophists and Freemasons, etc.
Let's hear it.
Yeah, okay. So this comes from Manly P. Hall's The Secret Destiny of America, which shares a lot of insight into the Freemasonic, Rosicrucian, secret society influence on the founding of America.
The hidden hand.
Right. So in the old State House in Philadelphia, a group of men were gathered for the momentous task of severing the last tie between the old country and the new. It was a grave moment, and not a few of those present feared that their lives would be in forfeit for their audacity. In the midst of the debate, a fierce voice rang out.
Gentlemen, hear my plea!
The debaters stopped and turned to look upon the stranger. Who was this man who had suddenly appeared in their midst and transfixed them with his oratory? They had never seen him before. None knew when he had entered, but his tall form and pale face filled them with awe. His voice ringing with a holy zeal, the stranger stirred them to their very souls. His closing words rang through the building.
God has given America to be free!
As the stranger sank into a chair, exhausted, a wild enthusiasm burst forth. Name after name was placed upon the parchment. The Declaration of Independence was signed. It was done. But where was the man who had precipitated the accomplishment of this immortal task? Who had lifted for a moment the veil from the eyes of the assemblage and revealed to them a part, at least, of the great purpose for which the new nation was conceived? He had disappeared, nor was he ever seen again or his identity established.
Secret man
So this-
with a secret plan.
So this man, and John, if you want to I just grabbed a couple bits from his actual speech that
Okay.
you could give. So as I said, they're all wondering, they're waiting before the speech is given. They're debating, there's gibbets, there's scaffolds, there's gallows they have to worry about. They're concerned, they're going back and forth. So Manly P. Hall continues. This is an excerpt from the actual speech, supposedly.
Gibbet! They may stretch our necks on all the gibbets in the land. They may turn every rock into a scaffold, every tree into a gallows, every home into a grave, and yet the words of that parchment can never die.
Good, that was great.
Sign that parchment. Sign if the next moment the gibbet's rope is about your neck. Sign if this next minute this hall rings with the clash of falling axes. Sign by all your hopes in life or death. As men, as husbands, as fathers, brothers, sign your names to the parchment or be accursed forever. Sign, and not only for yourselves, but for all ages. For that parchment will be the textbook of freedom, the Bible of the rights of man forever. I would implore you to remember this truth. God has given America to be free.
The unknown speaker fell exhausted into his seat. The delegates, carried away by his enthusiasm, rushed forward. John Hancock scarcely had time to pen his bold signature before the quill was grasped by another. It was done. So who was this guy, right? So the idea is, according to the different authors and Manly P. Hall from his reading of the original records, supposedly, was that no one knew who he was, where he came from, right? So how had he entered the locked and guarded room? This is a very important time. You know, you don't want people sneaking in there and just listening, especially
Right, because
people
you're committing treason.
So
potentially.
it's locked, it's guarded. This man appears, and no one knows who he is or where he came from. No one claimed to have seen him before, and there's no mention of him after this single instance. But what's interesting is Manly P. Hall points out that there are some clues. He does mention in his speech, we'll have the whole speech in our show notes, he mentions the all-seeing eye of God, right? Which,
very Freemason.
yeah, afterwards,
symbology.
that appears...
Is that of God?
Well, that's
yeah.
That's what their interpretation of it is?
Masonic idea is
Yeah.
the eye of God, right?
The all-seeing eye
The
is
all-seeing
the
eye.
eye of God.
There's a lot of Christian symbology.
A blend of
wrapped in.
like Christian mysticism and old Gnostic
So all
ideas.
the eyeball that you see all the time now that people link to the Illuminati, is that the same?
Yeah.
But it depends on your interpretation, of course. Like, do you trust the Freemasonic
Maybe it's
view?
Satan.
Well, if you look at the history, if you look at like in which this took us down a path on that we can't go down today, but you take this back to Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, all the way back to, I can't remember the very first mention of this stuff, but yeah, it goes back to
The Templars predated the Rosicrucians.
Right, at least the Western version of this. It starts with Christianity and a merging of this sort of clandestine group that seeks to kind of merge ancient ideas with Christianity.
Right. So this brings us to our next point here. That eye, right, in Freemasonry, but also, of course, in a lot of other symbology. And what you're talking about, the connection of the Theosophical idea, which was like the Rosicrucians and going back to the Christian Gnostics. And Manly P. Hall points out, he suggests that this person that appeared here was working on behalf of this, in his idea, a benevolent order. He says, the all-seeing eye of God, which was afterwards to appear on the reverse side of the Great Seal of the New Nation, right? We see that on the back of the dollar bill, right? The floating pyramid capstone with the eye. There is much to indicate that the unknown speaker was one of the agents of, quote, the secret order, guarding and directing the destiny of America. So this comes from his book, The Secret Destiny of America, which a lot of people point to as evidence of this infiltration of, some would say, the Illuminati, the Bavarian Illuminati through the Scottish Free Rite Masons, to influence the destiny of America, which is why you see like George Washington. I think I heard somewhere that him or other founders at the time had reported that there was a corruption happening of Freemasonry, that it was a brotherhood, but there were influences that were starting to corrupt it. We could do a whole episode on that. I don't know that much about that aspect of it. But according to Manly P. Hall, there was definitely this influence that brought this to bear in the New World, in America, in the United States.
Right. And wasn't it initially Manly P. Hall's work, didn't he discover that this was an idea that started in ancient Greece, that there would be this new Atlantis, that America, and then they saw the opportunity America will be this new Atlantis, a place where there can be democratic rule instead of monarchs, right? So
Actually, it's a constitutional republic, right?
Right. But the idea of the democracy, that came out of ancient Greece. And
Plato, Atlantis was the idea of the republic.
Right.
I think in Plato, the Atlanteans were evidence of a civilization that had hubris and grew too egotistical, fought the great republic of ancient Athens, and then was destroyed, and the gods buried him in the ocean, right? To that point, Manly P. Hall did believe that the ancients knew about the Western Hemisphere way back before supposedly, Christopher Columbus, and he talked about the Phoenicians, which we're talking about now, that made it here to the United States. Anyways, so he did believe, and then a lot of his writings talk about this basic idea that the ancients knew about the Western Hemisphere, right? And that the New World, in his words, of an illuminated civilization, right? You get that Illuminati idea, was the goal of these ancient civilizations. And one interesting anecdote that I just grabbed here was, he says, there can be no doubt, and this goes back to our ancient tech, that episode we did on ancient technology.
Yes.
There can be no doubt that the existence of a great continent in the Western Hemisphere was known to the ancient Greeks, and also to the Egyptians and the Chinese. It is nothing short of foolish to assume that the ancients lacked ships sufficiently seaworthy to navigate the large oceans.
Right.
Long before the Christian era, the older civilization had constructed boats far larger and more seaworthy than any of the vessels used by Columbus. One of the Ptolemies of Egypt built a ship large enough to have an orchard of fruit trees on the deck, together with swimming pools and fountains stocked with live fish.
I want that cruise.
So imagine like a massive island ship.
Acre-long ship.
So the question is, as we get ready to take a break here, because I think it's about time for a break, who was this guy? Was he just another part of the Continental Congress, some guy they didn't recognize, that was shrouded in mystery because he hadn't shut up enough for anyone to know who he was? He was kind of a loner. That seems unlikely. What does seem likely, as I would put forth, is that he was likely an immortal Freemason vampire.
Yes.
Shuttled over the oceans by Benjamin Franklin.
It's not that far of an idea.
Right. No, and as we will suggest here throughout the course of this episode, it's damn likely.
It's most likely.
Yeah. So stay tuned, guys, because that's what's coming up. We're going to talk about...
I'm excited for that.
Well, the guy we're going to talk about coming up after the break, in a lot of ways, sounds like the inspiration for Lestat, actually, from Interview with the Vampire.
I do like the idea
Renaissance
of like
France.
colonial vampires. That's creepy.
And what's weird is like, it's all fiction, right? I mean, we see these movies and stuff, but
Allegedly.
there is some weird connections coming up with the guy we're going to be talking about, who a lot of people have suggested was this mysterious figure who was believed to be immortal at the time.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Do you think vampires are real? Like not just people that drink blood, but like the
Actual
mythical kind that
undead
live
vampires?
forever?
I always thought it was a fantasy, right? And ridiculous.
Can you
Although
change your mind?
I loved Buffy the Vampire Slayer growing up as a kid because I was a nerd.
Get to the point.
But we've talked about the drinking of blood, right? The royals, the idea of like
Energy,
feeding
vampires.
off blood of the
Yeah.
youth to enhance their health.
We're going to get into the very next episode. We're going to get into some recent developments in using the blood of the young to help the older people stay
But this
fit.
goes back to that vampire saga, right? That mythology, and it carries forth
It is
today.
interesting. It's not quite the immortal, but it keeps them young to a certain extent. That's so creepy, dude, because there is stuff coming out about that now. Like I remember a couple billion, is it Peter Thule?
Oh, Thule?
He's a billionaire, but he runs like a company that
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. They
they're
don't
like
blood donations, right?
experimenting on actually using blood to
Oh,
rejuvenate.
the Pettit Institute. Peter Thule, the Pettit Institute
Is that what it is?
for bioengineering and bioscience. Sounds like that'd be the guy.
Probably.
It probably is.
Oh yeah, lipids, metabolism, lipids in the blood.
I mean, I remember reading an article where he was directly involved in harvesting blood as ways to regain youth.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean that's on the forefront of science right now is how to use the blood of the youth. Now, I mean, we'll get
It's
into
all science, so
right.
It's not.
Well, I mean, it
anything bad.
depends on how you look at it.
It's funny. Yeah, it used to be you bathe in blood, you were this monster queen or whatever. What is
Like
it, Madame Bovary?
No, that was a fictional character. It was
Madame
terrible.
Bovine?
You're talking about Báthory.
Báthory, yeah.
She was eventually beheaded because she had killed like I don't know how many
Hundreds
hundreds of young women in her area and
my
just bathed in their blood. And she was a she was a royal.
Oh my
you know?
gosh, that's horrifying.
Yo, have you not heard the story?
No.
Oh my God, she is the devil incarnate in my mind.
She killed hundreds
She
of
would just
women?
bring women as like to become her servants, and then she would use the virgins, and then she would use them to basically make bubble bath water and just bathe in their
she would
blood.
have a guard come in and like slit her.
Yeah, I'm not sure the technical details of it,
Well,
but
that's even more horrifying. The
yeah.
technical details of how that
Right.
actually
Well,
would
when people
happen.
do-
Báthory has been labeled by Guinness World
that's where
Records.
we get Bloody Mary from, I think. Or wait, or is that might be Marie Antoinette?
That's horrifying.
So this comes from Wikipedia, but it's the basic idea of her.
God, that's just
the most
so
prolific
disturbing.
female murderer. Though the precise number of her victims is debated, Báthory and 4 collaborators were accused of torturing and killing hundreds of young women between 1590 and 1610. There is no hard evidence about the whole murder case. The highest number of victims cited during Báthory's trial was 650 women. However, this number comes from the claim by a servant girl named Susanna that Jacob Silvassi, Báthory's court official, had seen the figure in one of Báthory's private books. The book was never revealed, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, she killed a lot of people.
Gross.
Yeah, but basically she, in this supposedly...
That's a demon.
Yeah, her as well as the guy we're going to be talking about may have inspired the idea of Dracula. But I think for our guy, it's more innocent. Because our guy is an alchemist. The guy we're going to be talking about, the guy who inspired the signing of the Declaration of Independence. A different supposed immortal, but
But this is why I, talking about belief in vampires, I do think it's possible. And there are stories, and I would love to do a full episode on vampires because there's one specifically.
It's in our intro.
It is in our intro. I've been waiting to do it. But like our show, we started, there's so many things that I thought were on the edges of possibility. I thought probably not, like fairies, gnomes. We did a gnome episode.
All real.
I'm not so sure anymore if gnomes are
All
not
real.
Yeah. But anyways, coming to vampires, there's this really fascinating book, a guy who did a lot of research and actually had a call out to vampires that were living and wanted to know. It was pretty convinced by somebody. And I'm getting his book. We're going to do an episode on it. This is a real guy who in the 90s was having a call out on a radio show because he was writing this book and he wanted to know about vampire culture. And, we're going to be getting into this a little bit towards the ends with the vampire culture in Louisiana. But to bring it back to the vampire stuff, to bring it back to our focus of this episode, which I don't even think we've mentioned his name yet, but the Count of St. Germain.
That's the mysterious guy?
That's the mysterious guy. By his own account, had been alive for 300 years. By many other accounts, he's been alive for thousands of years and potentially is still alive today. We're going to get into that after the break.
Interesting.
And a subscriber to the show. So if you're out there,
he listens.
call and leave us a speak pipes. St. Germain.
You found me.
Well, let's get into it after the break.
We'll see you in a second.
St. Germain neither confirmed nor denied anything said about him. How old was he? 100? 200? 2,000 years? 2,000 years?
Nobody knew where he came from. And there was a strangeness. He never seemed to age.
Where was he actually from? Atlantis?
His knowledge of history is so extraordinary, it makes one believe he lived through the events himself.
Welcome back. We're just getting into the mystery, guys. We
got a long way to go. So buckle up.
We've got a lot of fascinating tidbits coming out.
Fun stuff for you this evening.
Are immortals real? Is there a hidden hand behind the destiny of America and, nay, the world?
Humanity at large.
Yes, and yes.
Yes, and yes. This is an idea, of course, that we mentioned Manly P. Hall has talked about. We can do a whole episode on him.
And not just him, but Theosophy.
Theosophists like Madame Blavatsky.
What does that mean? Short definition.
Short definition of Theosophy.
Short definition of Theosophy would be... I grabbed this just to get a cohesive idea. This comes from Wikipedia.
Short.
Okay.
I wanted to keep going to the conversation.
Well, we're going to do a whole episode on Theosophy, by the way.
I do want to know what it means.
You've heard Blavatsky. You've heard her name before.
Madame Blavatsky?
Esoteric
rituals and secret societies. And
we talked about Aleister Crowley. He's sort of a derivation of the ideas of Theosophy with the Knights of the Golden Dawn.
But it's deep in the esoteric arts, the occult, the secret teachings, carrying forward this idea of growth of humanity based on secret knowledge from ancient mystery schools. It goes back to ancient Egypt.
Okay.
Theosophy, basically, the idea is that there is a group of people who are enlightened beings or Mahatmas that help guide humanity through time and through the ages.
Right.
And reincarnated.
They work behind the scenes.
Work behind the scenes. They walk among us. Not necessarily immortal, but reincarnated.
Their plans are immortal.
Right. And they reincarnate into new bodies. And
oh, really?
The Adepts would. So there are different levels that you can get to in Theosophy.
How come all these guys seem so creepy?
Which guys?
Why can't they be like, I don't know.
Well, I think if you're
Saint
an
Germain
immortal,
was
like saints.
Saint Germain was pretty charming. That's the guy we're going to get to. Well, he was the Count of St. Germain. He was.
And he plays a heavy role in Theosophy.
Does he?
Yes. He is one of the key figures of Theosophy.
Okay. Moving forward.
So let's get it. Basically, this is where like the New Age comes from, our New Age ideas.
Okay.
But initially, it's not how we think of New Age today. It was literally like the dawning of ushering the New Age of like Aquarius, right? It was specifically related to, I think people believe in Theosophists that St. Germain was that. He was the next adept to come in and bring. Anyways,
right.
It's a whole other topic. But
let's get into who he was.
So he is the guy, right? So okay, this is a real historical figure, the Count of St. Germain, shrouded in mystery, even in historical texts and historical records of the time. This would take place in around the 1700s, right?
Yeah, during King Louis XV's reign. And what we know of him comes from his friends at the time, who are people you'd know of by name, like Voltaire, King Louis XV.
Supposedly was in contact with the early revolutionaries like Benjamin Franklin, brother Freemason at the same lodge. Supposedly, Voltaire was for sure, and supposedly so was this figure, this immortal saint, St. Germain. Anyways, let's get into some of the mystery of him, some of the compelling stories that make people think and believe that he was
a strange immortal character.
An immortal.
Potentially a vampire?
Maybe. Potentially the inspiration for the vampiric idea that we have today.
Bring it in.
Okay, so he appeared in Venice early in the century looking about 45 years of age. That's what most people said at the time.
Extremely handsome.
Extremely handsome, intense, mesmerizing eyes with a charming manner.
Picture me, John, basically.
Yeah, essentially. So one of the most compelling accounts as far as his immortality or his longevity would come from the Countess von Georgi from 1760. So she met with him at the court of Louis XV, who was a close friend. So this guy was a courtier, right? Which means like
hang out in the court.
He was always like a guy that hung around with noblemen, the royals, and he just like, they'd talk shop and, like
talk shop with the royals.
All the like latest like fantastic scientific wonders and new power saw. But he was an alchemist. At this time in the 1700s, these men of mystery of Renaissance men that, well, we'll get to all the things he could do, but basically like a magical kind of figure.
Like David Blaine.
Like, yeah, exactly. Just like Dave Blaine's
I've been watching him lately.
He's mesmerizing Ricky Gervais, like all the celebrities, putting needles in his arms. Kanye West, these guys. He is like that of the time.
But he's not just that. He's not a magician per se. He does alchemy. He does...
What is alchemy? I know I'm going off on the tangent.
That's all right. It's an important question.
Yeah.
Alchemy has multiple facets to it, but essentially...
You're turning things into something else?
Yeah, exactly. Transmutation. So the idea of taking a base metal...
Like water into wine?
Or mercury or lead into gold. That was one of the primary things. Or into silver.
That was the main thing, like turning into precious metals?
It was called the Great Work, was the seeking of what was called the Philosopher's Stone. So the Philosopher's Stone...
You know a lot about this.
I did research for the episode. Well, our band in high school was called About Alchemy. And at the time,
you say that out loud.
All I knew was that it was a merging of things to make
check
something.
It out.
Yeah, don't look it up. It was okay. It was good. For the time, it was whiny alternative
The second
music.
album would have rocked billboards.
Stop listening to the show because of it.
Hey, it's a good record.
Cancel. Belief holes canceled.
Check it out. Anyway, so alchemy. So that's one facet of it. Turning base metals into gold. And in that process, they were looking for what was called the Philosopher's Stone. And the Philosopher's Stone is synonymous with the elixir of life or longevity, something that could help you to live a long time or even potentially be immortal.
Which this count allegedly had possession of both.
Right. Well, and they were kind of the same thing. Here, I'll read you a brief description here. The Philosopher's Stone is a legendary alchemical substance capable of turning base metals such as mercury into gold. This was what they would constantly seek, was this chemical compound that they could use to transmute, common metals into gold to make them wealthy.
Everyone wants gold.
But it could also give you eternal life. It was basically this magical substance that sought perfection and purity. It's also called the elixir of life, useful for rejuvenation and for achieving immortality. For many centuries, it was the most sought goal in alchemy. The Philosopher's Stone was the central symbol of the mystical terminology of alchemy, symbolizing perfection at its finest, enlightenment,
like Parfit,
and heavenly bliss. Yes, just like our last
Practiced apprentice.
Efforts to discover the Philosopher's Stone were known as the magnum opus or the Great Work. And you'll hear that word. Manly P. Hall uses it as the great work, but in his connotation, it's the spiritual great work, the great work of transforming humankind.
Pretty intense.
It's a lot
to that.
Yeah, but you can see why someone who has this passion for this pursuit in life could be very compelling. Especially if you were eloquent and charming and you're saying, by the way, I have the elixir of life and I've lived 500 years. And
is there any truth to this though?
Well, we're going to get into some of the accounts here. So excited.
Well, he, from his own mouth, he said on multiple occasions he was over 300 years old. So we know at least, whether that was...
But alchemy.
Is there truth
to alchemy?
Well, if you look at the alleged reincarnation of this guy in the 1970s, you can watch YouTube clips of him doing alchemy. He later killed himself in a van.
Okay, well, now you're jumping the gun here.
He later drove his car into a river.
There was a man who claimed, I think his name was Richard Shaffer or something, but in the 70s, he came out and said that he was the reincarnation of, St. Germain.
But the original Count of St. Germain, one of the things that made him so, yes, he was into alchemy, but a lot of people were, like his friend Casanova, who you've heard of, the ladies' man. We'll hear a quote from him about St. Germain, but he was also renowned for speaking over 10 languages. He was proficient in violin. He composed things that would rival some of the composers of the time. Like he performed these things for people that made it seem like he had been living for hundreds of years. He also spoke of centuries before him as if he lived the experience, not as if he read them.
Interesting.
He'd recount like deep historical information, but he would do it in a way that it was like he was recalling it, like he was there. And everyone was convinced of this. That's one of the things that was fascinating.
He wasn't considered a prophet or anything? He was a saint?
He was eventually considered a prophet. He did have some prophecies, which we'll get to.
Interesting.
But yeah,
I like it. I like it, Jeremy.
Thank you, John. Some of the things that are, I guess, touchstones in our historical past that we can mention, like, for instance, he, in 1710, was praised by Remy, I'm not sure who he is, but for his...
That's important then.
Well, no, I'm going to get to it. His clear and moving pianoforte improvisations, a signed copy of which eventually came to the hands of Tchaikovsky. And 2 of his signed musical compositions still exist in the British Museum. So we know that he was a praised musical composer and violinist.
Yeah, you can hear his stuff on YouTube.
You may have heard of Paganini. That may sound familiar. A famous violinist, composer at the time. Supposedly at the time, people heard both of them play and preferred St. Germain, Count de St Germain.
It's like jack of all trades, of the pinnacle of the cream
Yeah,
of the
exactly.
Not
That's
only
crazy.
you are a proficient violinist, but you're also an incredible composer, genius composer. Yet you also somehow find the time to learn French, English, German,
Right.
Italian, Spanish, Portuguese.
Yeah, it does seem like he would be alive for hundreds of years.
Yeah, Chinese, Arabic, like
Sanskrit you can write. I mean,
he could also, one of the coolest things I think, he was also ambidextrous and he was seen to write 2 words at the same time.
no, not words. It's even better. He could write with both hands simultaneously. Franz Graffer, who's a historical fella that we'll link,
the guy that
as
lived.
deep as I'm going to go with him, witnessed St. Germain quickly write the same letter with both hands on 2 pieces of paper.
How's that better than 2 different words?
Simultaneously, because it's a letter, not a single letter, a document he wrote.
Are you sure they didn't mean a letter?
When placed on top of one another and held up against a window pane, the translucent sheets revealed identical scripts as if they were impressions from the same copper plate.
Still could just be
So 2 hands writing the same
letter.
I think letter meant, I don't think it meant a letter.
Like A.
Yeah,
that's what I was
A,
thinking.
and people were blown away.
Yeah, I don't think so.
A whole document. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's pretty strange.
So, and one of the coolest things I think comes from the historical characters we know that people are familiar with that mention him and their experiences when they met him. And the first one that I think we started to talk about before we kind of went down the alchemy route was, what's her name?
Countess von Georgi?
Yeah. What happened with her? Give us that, Jared.
Oh, right. That's where we left off. Yeah, this is our first appearance of him, right, in amongst his peers at the time.
In the 1700s, in France.
You're right, in 1700s. So about 1760, Countess von Georgi met him at the court of Louis XV, stunned to see the Count completely unchanged after 50 years.
Really? Still just good looking?
Mm-hmm.
Even better.
Countess de Georgi, upon meeting him in Madame Pompadour's house in the 1760s, asked him if his father had been in Venice in 1710. No, madame, the Count replied, but I myself was living in... Actually, do your Slavic voice, John, because he is supposedly from Transylvania.
Where is that? No, madame,
The Count replied,
but I myself was living in Venice at the end of the last and beginning of this century. I had the honor to pay you court then, and you were kind enough to admire a little barcarolle of my composing.
The Countess could not believe her ears.
But if that is true,
She gasped.
you must be at least 100 years old.
The Count smiled.
That, madame, is not impossible.
That's good. Tim Curry at the end. That's good there.
I did do the gorillas last episode.
They're from the same area. That's what's interesting.
That's fascinating.
Good accent.
I
Okay.
agree. I could do him all night.
So yeah, that's interesting. So that was one of the first written accounts of someone seeing him and seeming like he had been around for a long time. She remembered him from when she was a child.
Okay, so he also getting the alchemy and chemistry that he had supposedly done for witnesses, right?
Oh, yeah.
Transmuting gold, that kind of thing. He admitted that he could grow pearls artificially and once removed a flaw from a large diamond owned by Louis XV. Casanova witnessed a silver 60-centimeter coin taken from his own pocket, transmuted into pure gold in about 2 minutes. When Casanova voiced doubts about what he had seen, St. Germain simply replied,
People who question my art do not merit my attention.
and never saw Casanova again.
Oh, that was the last time?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
St. Germain's own unchanging age and unique eating habits no one ever saw him eat.
Weird.
Suggests that
Maybe
he
he
had
was feeding on blood.
suggests that he had in his possession the elixir vitae, or the elixir of life, since others claim to have received direct benefit, including renewed stamina and restored health, enhanced memory, and prolonged life from its derivatives. It appears that St. Germain possessed knowledge of Azoth, which in its three forms constitutes the Philosopher's Stone, the power of projection, and the elixir of life.
Interesting. What's interesting about all this is, I still feel like as human beings, we're still looking for this.
Oh, absolutely.
It's so ingrained in us to look for mortality, whether it's through
fountain of
religion
youth,
or
technology,
transhumanism or blood drinking or whatever,
Florida.
Health in general.
Florida.
Yeah, because of this, we have Florida. Ponce de Leon was looking for the Fountain of Youth, and he found Florida, the land of the flowers.
They're doing great.
I learned that in 6th grade when I do a
And that's
study
where
on-
all the old people go to retire.
And that's where they go to retire, and yet
Or to
it's
make
not
meth.
working for
It's
them.
not working so well. They go there to die.
Oh, maybe one day. My grandparents had a little space there.
Yeah.
But then they came to Ohio, back home to Ohio, and died.
No, they didn't.
Yeah, they died in a retirement home in Ohio.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
right.
they lived with us for a couple years.
That's
That
why.
was
If they
sad.
stayed in Florida,
It would still be alive.
Grandpa Don and Grandma Wilma, good people.
Grandpa Germain.
Donald. Maybe he was St. Germain. We did find his Freemason Bible. We found he was a Freemason. Maybe.
That's the story for
Maybe
another
he was a
time.
reincarnation.
We do have a grandfather, a Freemason, which may be the reason
isn't
that we're
that
so
unique.
interested in all this
But
stuff.
that's not that unique.
Well, we just found
How
that
do you
out
know?
a couple months ago.
I mean, you could be a Freemason right now if you wanted to.
What if he's a 33rd degree?
Well, maybe he was 1,000.
He was a 33-degree Mason.
He was?
Yeah, and
Isn't
I
that-
found baby carcasses and reptiles
Okay, now.
shedding skins in our basement.
Let's not cast
we don't know
aspersions.
how deep he was in.
I'm just
but
kidding. He was a loving man.
He was, as far as we
A
know.
lot of 33-year Masons are good people.
If there is nefarious activities, it could have been hijacked, right? Like sort of
for
like the
sure.
Vatican or something.
Exactly. When that is the concept, is that there was, we can't get into all this right now. I haven't done the research on it, but I remember hearing, we should dig into this for an episode, but the idea that there was a corruption through the Scottish Rite Freemasonry from the Bavarian Illuminati that came in and infiltrated, and that a lot of people, especially at the founding of the country, were concerned about this influence. There are scripts supposedly that tell of this. We can do an episode on it, but our grandfather was a Mason. A lot of people are Masons out there, even 33rd degree. And what I heard was that, and this may be hearsay because I can't remember where this came from. We can look more into it. But the idea that once you become a 33 degree, you are asked, or maybe some are asked, to write an essay about how they feel about, I think it's Albert Pike or Manly P. Hall's more esoteric writings on Freemasonry and about its purpose of shaping the world. Like we saw the Secret Destiny of America, right?
And if you answer the right way.
The secret influence that the Freemasons need to have. And if you answer one way and say like, well, people are independent, we need to support communities and strive for the ideals of, then that's great. You get a high five and you're 33 degree. If you answer differently, you get tapped. And then you move up to the other unspeakable levels. That's one of the ideas.
Right. So strange.
And we will look into that.
We'll look more into that. Right now, this is Jeremy Hearsay. But it's an interesting concept. And maybe any of you guys out there, we might have Freemason listeners.
I'm sure.
Who knows?
I'm sure. Poppycock.
So there are some other famous quotes from acquaintances.
Right. And I think this is significant because, I mean, it is absolutely 100% known by historians that he was a real guy.
Yeah.
His allegations of who he was, or the mystery and the rumors, are left up for debate, but who he was a real person. The people that he knew were famous people at the time, people you would know. Voltaire, a famous philosopher, writer, witty guy. Voltaire's quote about St. Germain, who he knew personally, said, quote, "A man who knows everything and who never dies." That comes from Voltaire, one of the most respected philosophers.
It never dies. I mean, could that be metaphorical?
It could be. I mean, he was a witty guy. He was into satire.
People, yeah. I mean, Wikipedia suggests that he's satirically said, right? It's anything Wikipedia is like, this is fiction.
Yeah, I get, you don't believe them at all.
Right.
With anything.
You can take some of the basic facts.
Well, we quote them a lot. So.
We do, because I mean, Wikipedia is a good source
for the dumb
basics.
things.
Yeah,
They're good for the basic facts, the mainstream.
Anything controversial, you can't really rely upon.
Right. You can go into the notes and see how people in Wikipedia argue about it, and then you can get an idea of like what they're keeping in, what they're leaving out.
Right. And well, there's also a bit of this, like Voltaire, even if he was being sarcastic, just like we're going to read with Casanova's quote, who, John, you're probably familiar, or at least you've heard the name Casanova. He's like the most, if you're like, oh, what a Casanova.
Yeah,
that guy's a ladies' man, right? He's a real dude from the 1700s who was very good with the ladies. That was one of his claims to fame.
A charmer.
And he ran in the circle of people that included Voltaire, it included King Louis XV, and it included the Count of St. Germain.
Were they like Kanye and Drake?
It was like a posse. I mean, there were,
it's like Obama and Kanye.
people coming and going in France at the time. A lot of things were happening.
They were the cream of the crop back then, as far as people, like, were they the famous people?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, I meant Obama and Jay-Z, not Kanye. Different group.
Kanye.
Anyway, But a lot was going on in the
Okay.
1700s. This is right before the French Revolution, which the Count of St. Germain predicts that this is going to happen, warns the French royalty that this is going to happen if they don't pay attention, if they don't listen, and it comes to pass.
Well, what's fascinating, okay, so Voltaire was a friend, right?
Right.
Voltaire was in the same Freemasonic lodge as Benjamin Franklin in France around the time of the
Right.
Declaration of Independence.
We start to creep towards that introductory statement about the mysterious man, the mystery man, during the Declaration of Independence. Starting to tie those knots.
We're getting into the connection where this guy, St. Germain, could actually be the figure seen at the Declaration of Independence, the signing,
right,
convincing everyone. Because Voltaire, among other things, being a philosopher, he was also known for, besides his criticisms of the Catholic Church and these things, he was also known for his advocacy of, quote, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and separation of church and state. Does that sound familiar?
Sounds familiar.
Does that French philosopher sound like he may be influencing a little bit
It's like
of
Thomas Paine. Sounds like
the Constitution, Declaration of Independence? So if he's in the same lodge with Benjamin Franklin, obviously these ideas are floating around. And if Voltaire is friends with the immortal Count de St Germain, alleged immortal, who's this charming alchemist, blah, 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 who has other connections, who is said to have supposedly been a part of this lodge as well, it is possible that Benjamin Franklin...
Dare I say probable?
Dare I say probable? That might be a stretch, but let's say it anyway. Probable that Benjamin Franklin ferried this immortal over to the Continental Congress to help inspire people to sign, right?
Possibly.
Which sounds crazy, but this guy, St. Germain, on a lot of accounts, was a fellow that when he approached you, even if you didn't know him, you were inspired to bow. This was a person, because he's immortal.
John, this guy was a mesmerizer.
Right.
You'd look into his eyes and you're like, I just want to sink into this man's eyes. I want to listen to what he
That's how you
says
feel when I look at you.
every day.
Well, mesmerization comes from Mesmer, right? Who was also around at this time. And Blavatsky said that he, I think among other sources, it referenced that St. Germain had actually influenced Mesmer's use of animal magnetism, this ability to like hypnotize.
Basically, the beginning of hypnotism
Right.
came from this, which is interesting because that's the vampire lore, right? Hypnotize you with the eyes, draw you in.
Mesmerize.
All going back to the Count of St.
There's
Germain.
so many connections with, that's what's interesting. We're going to get to that shortly
Think
here.
about if your eyes were like a couple hundred years old, how much magnetism you could possess.
That's very true, man.
Or how many cataracts you'd have.
Think of how much...
No, but you're still only 45 years
That's
old
true.
in the physical,
Vampire
but you
eyes,
have hundreds of years of knowledge and practice and just...
Oh, how intense your eyes would be?
Yeah.
Especially if they're windows to the soul.
Dude, but you have the young body, but the intensity of hundreds of years of experience.
How charming and how much confidence would you have walking into any room?
You would know so much more than anyone.
Yeah, it's like that idea about like, oh man, if I could only go back to high school as a 30-year-old, I would date the hottest girls. Well, imagine if you're
That's your
1,000 years
idea.
old.
No one says that.
But John, Casanova,
Yep.
because I would say you're a handsome man, and most people find you charming. So I think
Are you
you'd be
talking about
good
me
to
specifically?
read.
Oh, yes,
you'd
of
be good to
course.
read the voice of Casanova.
Yes, I will do a good
You
job
read
of
the
this.
quote when he was speaking about his acquaintance, arguably friend, but he harbored some jealousy.
Who harbored jealousy?
Casanova.
Why?
Because, well, you could argue jealousy.
Jealousy. I thought this guy was the cat's meow.
Casanova was, but so was Saint Germain. You know what Casanova didn't have? Casanova was also an alchemist, but what he couldn't do was live for 300 years. And what the Count of St. Germain was telling all the ladies was that he's been alive for 300 years. Casanova was like, this fucking guy.
Oh,
So,
I see.
yeah,
I
yeah.
see. I'd be a little perturbed.
But he
too.
respected him. He respected his alpha maleness.
Yeah, and
you know?
his age,
And his
hundreds of
age,
years.
yeah.
This is the thing. This thing with Voltaire and with Casanova, they both have these little like sarcastic sort of things. But I think anybody would be in that situation. A guy comes in, he's just saying all this stuff that sounds so out that you're like, this guy's full of shit, but everybody's buying it.
It's probably what the disciples felt like when Jesus was around. Not the disciples, but just regular people.
Well, Theosophists believe that St. Germain and Jesus were both adepts. They both reached the highest level.
They were both part of
Human
this
mastery?
secret
Yeah.
council to continue to move.
Really?
Yeah.
Who thought this?
Theosophy, but like
Theosophy.
Madame Blavatsky, like
Really?
that whole belief
They
system.
talk about Jesus?
Yeah, so they believe that actually
It's all tied in.
some of them believe that you know how St. Germain's been reincarnated. He's different incarnations throughout time to push humankind's destiny. He was the father of civilization, supposed to push humankind towards this positive enlightenment. They believe that he was, well, a certain sect of them believe that he was Joseph of Nazareth, Jesus's father,
Dad.
and was there to help Jesus into that. I mean, this is this whole Christian mysticism that goes back to early Christian Gnosticism, 180.
This is really involved.
Oh yeah, this is why my brain was mush.
The roots
today.
are so deep. And we always want to do an episode on like, how does Freemasonry come in? How does it connect to the Rosicrucians? How does it connect to the Knights Templar? And they all go back and root together deeper and deeper down the line,
Right.
back to Christian mysticism.
Gnosticism?
Christian Gnosticism was that Gnostic idea.
Is this like the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Yep, that contains Gnostic books like the Book of Judas, the Book of Mary.
Things that were not put in the regular Bible.
Right, they weren't part of
Apocrypha.
the Council of Nicaea.
They were not part of the narrative.
Well, when we got into the Count of St. Germain stuff, I didn't know that the Count of St. Germain stuff is like, it's at the end of all of this vast theology and all these different secret societies. He plays a big role in a lot of these. So I went down all these rabbit holes, and we obviously couldn't fit it into this episode, but I have notes upon notes. When we do this next episode, I know where we're going with this, because I really want to, I've always wanted to like kind of bridge the differences between Rosicrucians and
secret societies.
Freemasons. Yeah, secret societies in general. It is fascinating, and Theosophy is super fascinating, because there's this idea of Eastern mysticism with Roman Catholic ideas, and yeah, we're going to do an episode on that because it is really fascinating. Basically, the idea of gurus throughout time, people pushing, these council of light that's helping
So what we're
people.
looking at now is like basically figures that when you dig deeper, you find that they're entrenched in this deeper lore of these secret societies and these kinds of things. So we're talking about them as they appear in history, but these are where they come from, the Rosicrucians, and we'll get into that here.
But let's get back to Casanova, John. Would you take us away?
Sure.
The most enjoyable dinner I had was with Madame de Gergy, who came with the famous adventurer known by the name of Count de St Germain. This individual, instead of eating, talked from the beginning of the meal to the end, and I followed his example in one respect, as I did not eat, but listened to him with the greatest attention. It may safely be said that as a conversationalist, he was unequaled. St. Germain gave himself out for a marvel and always aimed at exciting amazement, which he often succeeded in doing. He was a scholar, linguist, musician, and chemist, unbelievably attractive and a perfect ladies' man. This extraordinary man-creature, This extraordinary man, intended by nature to be the king of impostors and quacks, would say in an easy, assured manner that he was 300 years old, that he knew the secret of the universal medicine, that he possessed a mastery over nature, that he could melt diamonds, professing himself capable of forming, out of 10 or 12 small diamonds, one large one, of the finest water without any loss of weight. All this, he said, was a mere trifle to him, notwithstanding his boastings, his barefaced lies, and his manifold eccentricities. I cannot say I thought him offensive. In spite of my knowledge of what he was, and in spite of my own feelings, I thought him an astonishing man, as he always was astonishing to me.
I think he may have had a crush.
I
A
think
little
so.
bit. Very possible. It was France in the 1700s.
Casanova had a crush on St. Germain.
Yeah.
The ladies' man was attracted to a dude.
Yeah, that's how charming he was. Hundreds of years of practice. Same with Louis XV, the king, right? Also totally enamored.
Oh, yeah,
by
he
this
was like
guy.
the only guy that King Louis XV would let visit his mistress.
He liked him that much.
And admittedly, he even admitted that this wasn't his
Does he have
real
a
name.
biography or something? I kind of want to read this guy.
Their biographies, no autobiography, but there's biographies written about him. A lot of our research comes from that.
Really? He seems like an interesting fellow.
Fascinating guy.
I mean, he's hundreds of years old, so.
Yeah, allegedly. Thousands.
But yeah, the interesting thing was like somehow he was a guy who came from nowhere, who never gave his real identity. Never, and this is a time where people prided themselves on being acquainted.
Where they came from.
Yeah, being acquainted with people with a noble
Power,
background.
Right. He obviously had the credentials.
He didn't.
Not the credentials of connections, but the credentials of knowledge.
He had the knowledge, the charisma.
The way of speaking.
Like a nobility would have
He had
some of those
exactly.
features.
He had the noble way of speaking, the way not only the charm but the vernacular.
Right.
Like everything. He was obviously well bred,
Yeah,
well
right.
educated
That's
from
what
the
I mean.
finest school. And there is one suggestion, and this was even reported. This is his official, like most likely if he was a mortal man. He admitted supposedly that he was the son of Prince Francis II Rákóczi of Transylvania. So what's interesting about that is Prince Francis II Rákóczi of Transylvania, his eldest son died, and the idea is that he was the eldest son and they hid his death to protect basically his inheritance. That's a theory. He said that to the last person he stayed with, but there was no official record of his burial.
Right.
And he supposedly died or was buried when this king that he knew or this prince that he was staying with was away. So he came back and he was gone. But supposedly he had died that year of 17, what was it, Chris?
1784. Supposed death of Count St. Germain. Yeah, it was Prince Karl of Hesse. That's who it was. But this is one of those things where, like, you know, there's no record of the burial. He didn't see him die. He just disappears, and that's the official story. And even if that's true, he lived to be like 100 years old or close to that, which is unheard of at the time. The average age of a male at that time was like 35. And here's the thing. So yeah, average age 35, right? And he dies at 90 or something like that. But then after he dies, he's seen at a Masonic conference in Paris in 1785. Then he has a meeting with
Tupac.
Tupac.
Elvis.
This is the original like Elvis story. Yeah. 1786 had a meeting with the Empress of Russia. These are all accounts by these historical figures saying they saw him, they met him again. In 1870, I love this one, Napoleon III was so interested, by the way, Count of St. Germain had a prediction that a young boy named Napoleon would rise to power. And this is when Napoleon was 8. No one knew who he was. But he said a young boy named Bonaparte in his prophecy was going to rise to power.
So he had like not only past, he could see into the future?
Allegedly, yeah. These are recorded prophecy. That, also that Marie Antoinette would be assassinated. Also the French Revolution. He prophesied that. He wrote this in letters to people in the royal families warning them about it.
I wonder if his elixir gave him knowledge then too.
Possibly. That's a good question because you'd understand the past history.
Unless maybe after you live hundreds of years, you start to see the cycles of history.
Maybe. Well, you know, this is why people like Blavatsky, who, by the way, in 1896 claimed that she had met him. 1896, this is 100 years after he supposedly died. So one of the founders of Theosophy claimed to have met him, but she said...
There's a photograph of her with him, supposedly.
Yeah, but it's these things, these prophecies that make him not just someone who might have lived a long time, but someone who might have been an ascended master, someone who fits in this idea of the Council of Light.
Yeah, Theosophist Universe.
Didn't Corey Good talk about the Council of Light?
That's a...
Federation of Light?
Federation of Light.
Oh.
So he dips and dabbles from different places.
That's a Patron expansion
But
episode.
anyway,
if you guys are
the
interested.
Napoleon thing's interesting because in 1870, Napoleon III was so interested in the, quote, undying count that he had a special commission put together to collect information on the count. It was like the Blue Book project for the Count of St. Germain in 1870. The commission was stationed at the Hotel de Ville. Interestingly, a year later, a mysterious fire breaks out at the Hotel de Ville, consuming the files Napoleon's commission had collected. So he's collecting information on this man who's never died. He's got all this stuff together. What happens? Ignites in flames. And then what happens after that? A year later, he's seen again.
That's another interesting thing. When he supposedly died, who was the guy, Hesse, the prince or count or whoever it was, who was supposedly in his company right before he died?
Kept no records of the burial.
Well, there's another thing too, is like they accounted for all of his belongings after his death that were left at the castle. And it was like trousers, a shirt, none of the jewels that he had, none of the books that he had been writing in consistently, his diaries and journals and mathematical, alchemical writings, everything he kept in like this lockbox, all of it were not accounted for when he died. It disappeared. And so they went back to archival academics at the time or people interested in this stuff. But maybe he just took it with him. Maybe he didn't die. That's one of the arguments, right?
Right. Well, and the last thing on this timeline, there's a great site, John, and all of our listeners out there, there's a great site called Finding Count St. Germain. And on that site, there's a chronology of all these events, all the eyewitness accounts up to modern day. There's all the information if you want historical records, what he looked like, all this stuff. But one of the last things I want to mention in this chronology was in 1902, Jacques...
We're jumping into this already?
Well, I'm just saying at the end of this timeline, this is a little preview, a little taste at the end. In 1902, Jacques St. Germain arrives in New Orleans, Louisiana.
See vampire section.
Well, we'll get to that.
The vampires of New Orleans.
We should take a break.
We should take a break.
And when we get back, we're going to talk a little bit about...
we're going to go back to the founding of the nation and then get into the vampire.
Yeah. Oh, and we might even mention the Georgia Guidestones, which is an expansion episode we did that was supposedly built by R.C. Christian.
Was that Count St. Germain?
Was that a pseudonym for the Rosicrucians?
R.C. Christian. Is it all connected?
Probably. And I'm going actually to read that little article at the very end about that near-death experience.
Oh, yes.
It does fit well and kind of tops off the mortality, the question of death.
Awesome.
Interesting.
So.
All right. Well, that'll work well in this episode of immortality and theology, spirituality, and this idea of eternity. I will end it with a life after death experience. That's interesting. I like that.
Cool. All right, we'll be back in a minute.
Stay tuned.
Grab a drink.
He spoke at least a dozen languages so fluently that in any country he visited, he was accepted as a native. Accepted as a native. Accepted as a native.
St Germain you have called me. Yes, I come, a believer and a teacher of the law of reincarnation. This is my mantra, which I give to you. Nobody knew where he came from or his true identity.
It would take more than one lifetime to absorb so much knowledge. The man must be immortal.
And we're back.
And we're back. Welcome back, guys. Speaking of being back, we are about to take a little break for the summer. Not the whole summer, but for July. After this episode airs, we are going to be taking a break until August returns, or until August comes.
Yeah, we're taking a break. It's going to be a short break, but
fear not. For our patrons out there, we are going to be dropping at least one off the cuff, maybe two. For our regular listeners, you can hear us on the expansion episodes. There's plenty available there. If you get really lonely and you're missing the whole, sign up on Patreon. If you can't handle it right now, we will be back in August.
So what we're essentially doing is we're going to be focusing on, like we did a previous break that was pretty short.
Last year about this time.
And we want to try to grow the show. We want to try to develop our back-end system. So we're actually looking at developing a system away from Patreon. I don't know if we want to mention that, but we are going to have a system that allows us to own our own content and continue to produce for you guys in a more direct way. That's something we're going to work on over the break.
Also, we're getting into broadening our video stuff for patrons and for potentially YouTube live streams. We're going to be working on the video wing of Belief Hole, so we need to take a moment to grow the show, develop that stuff out.
Just a moment.
But we are still here for you. You can message us, reach out to us, leave your strange stories. We're still going to have, we're still be collecting those.
And regular listeners, we do have a buttload of content over at Patreon. If you are missing us, we got tons of episodes over there. So if you miss us while we're gone, definitely help us out.
Check it out.
If you're familiar with the show, if you've been listening for a while, as a regular listener, you'll know that every time we drop an episode since the beginning of season 2, we've dropped a full-length, well-researched, well-sound-designed story explosion episode each time. And honestly, some of my favorite episodes this season have been our expansion episodes, which is somewhat not unfortunate, but sometimes I get bummed out because I want everybody to hear it, but we can't predict it. So we pick a topic for each one, and it's a little looser in the expansion side, a little more casual, so it's sometimes a little more exciting. But not to say our regular episodes aren't exciting.
So if you want to get a little deeper in the hole, if you're not already there, jump on over to beliefhole.com, click on the Patreon button, become an expansion tier member, and you get all the bonus episodes, all the extra content off the cuffs, all this kinds of stuff.
$5 a month.
$5 a month. Skip a latte at Starbucks, or buy that latte and just splurge a little.
And we do want to just say thank you to all the patrons that we have right now. You guys really just help us keep putting out content, help us keep the lights on here to pay for all the technical things that we need to pay for. So I think that's about it.
Yeah.
So we will be back in August. And
for the regular listeners that don't sign up, you can hold out.
We'll be back. And we love you just as much.
Thanks for the ultimatum at the end there.
But no, we appreciate everyone who listens. It means a lot. All you guys who's sending in your stories, comments, whatever. Just that you're out there is awesome.
But should we get back into the show?
Let's dive back in to the mystery.
On this Independence Day celebration.
Yeah, I guess it will. It will come out around Independence Day probably, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a little before. Maybe
That's why we're
after.
doing it, right? Otherwise, I would have done Ouija Boards Gone Wild, which is, by the way, going to be our expansion episode for this
What
week.
is it?
Ouija Boards Gone Wild.
What does that mean?
I think you can
it's
put it together.
Okay. So, like,
It's a
creepy
pretty
Ouija
great
board
book I
stories.
got. It's by Rosemary Ellen Guiley. I think that's her name.
Oh, yeah, she's good.
Yes, with Rick Fisher. It's an awesome collection of real Ouija board stories. I'll do a little bit of background on Ouija boards, but we did one in our first season, so I'm not going to go into a deep dive of the history of the talking boards and stuff. Check that out if you want to maybe listen to that first before you check out the expansion episode. But we're going to be getting some crazy stories, and I might even get into the Zozo stuff.
Zozo?
Some of our listeners are probably familiar with the Zozo phenomenon.
Sounds dark.
It's
Yeah,
dark,
you
but
know, I heard about that on Mysterious Universe a while back, but it didn't seem like, it seemed like it was a little bit of a, I don't know, a stretch.
Well,
that
I
this
heard
entity was
I heard
real?
a lot of people call bullshit on it, so I was not very interested in it. After reading this book, I got into the story, so I started doing my own research online, and I got to say, and we'll get into this in the expansion, but the guy, if he is full of shit, he is double, triple down on his story. His blog is up to date, and it's all about how haters are saying this is bullshit. I've never gone
Didn't
back
they say
on my
he admitted
story.
it was fictitious?
Yeah, one of the comments I read, which was my first initial, like after I read the story, I was like, this is fascinating, but is this bullshit? I've heard this is bullshit. I checked it out, and one of the first comments I read on Reddit or something was like, Zozo's fake. The guy pretty much admitted it, yada, yada. I tried to find that where he admitted it. I couldn't find it. What I did find was his blog saying, my story's never changed. I'm still 100% on board. People try to twist my words and say this bullshit. So
Zozo is a spiritual entity, a demon of sorts that exists and attacks through the Ouija board.
We shouldn't get too far
No.
down this
I was
hole.
just trying to set people up for what you're talking about.
Okay, well, it's one phenomenon of the Ouija board experience in modern times. Whether or not it's true is left to be determined. But the fascinating thing is, regardless of this guy's story, there are plenty of bona fide experiences by people that write to him or write online all the time that seem extremely genuine about their experiences with this, that have this experience with this demon through the Ouija board named Zozo. So, but it's not just going to be Zozo, because I want to get into some other stuff, some historical newspaper accounts of people, killing their husbands because the Ouija board told them he was cheating, things like that. We're going to get into some naughty planchette experiences with, his Ouija board's gone wild. This is going to get kind of crazy.
Sounds interesting.
Everyone loves a good Ouija board story, so
that's true.
We'll get there.
Ouija boards terrify me.
But back to immortality in the French 1700s.
Back with the story of St. Germain.
Yes, and to get back to, we're going to kind of roll back just a bit to what we introduced in the beginning of this episode, which is the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Was there some hidden hand? Was there some immortal? Was there some St. Germain involved in the beginning of this country?
The founding of this nation.
Yeah.
Perhaps. I think probably. Right? It's probably an immortal.
It's probably.
Who's the professor?
Okay, so this is an interesting account, and this comes from... Actually, this is from Manly P. Hall as well, but it comes from a book. It comes from a treatise called Our Flag by Robert Allen Campbell, where he reviews the details of an obscure but most important episode of American history, the designing of the colonial flag of 1775, so a year before the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The account involves a mysterious man concerning whom no information is available other than that he was on familiar terms with both General Washington and Benjamin Franklin. The following description of him is taken from Campbell's treatise.
Okay, so it sounds like to me, as we set this up, this quote, professor, as they called him, the idea is that this could be the very same mysterious figure, the phantom of the Declaration of Independence, who called everyone to action to sign a year after this, right?
Obviously.
Oh, it's obvious? Okay.
Obvious, Jeremy. Okay. Come on. John, will you begin?
Little seems to have been known concerning this old gentleman, and in the materials from which this account is compiled, his name is not even once mentioned, for he is uniformly spoken of or referred to as the professor. He was evidently far beyond his 70 years, and he often referred to his historical events of more than a century previous, just as if he had been a living witness to their occurrence. Still, he was erect, vigorous, and active, hale, hearty, and clear-minded, as strong and energetic every way as in the prime of his life. He was tall, of fine figure, perfectly easy, very dignified in his manners, being at once courteous, gracious, and commanding. He was, for those times, and considering the customers of the colonists, very peculiar in his method of living.
This is going to sound familiar.
For he ate no flesh, fowl, or fish. He never used for food any green thing, any roots, or anything unripe. He drank no liquor, wine, or ale. He was well educated, highly cultivated, of extensive as well as varied information, and very studious. He spent considerable amounts of his time in the patient and persistent scanning of a number of very rare old books and ancient manuscripts which he seemed to be deciphering, translating, or rewriting. These books and manuscripts, together with his own writings, he never showed to anyone, and he always locked them up carefully in a large, old-fashioned, cubically shaped, iron-bound, heavy oaken chest whenever he left his room, even for his meals. He took long and frequent walks alone, sat on the brows of neighboring hills, or mused in the midst of the green and flowering gem meadows. He was fairly liberal, but in no way lavish, in spending his money, with which he was well supplied. He was a quiet, though a very genial and very interesting member of the family. and he was seemingly at home upon any and every topic coming up in conversation. He was, in short, one whom everyone would notice and respect. Sounds a little bit like me. Whom few would feel well acquainted with, and whom no one would presume to question concerning himself, as to whence he came, why he tarried, or whither he journeyed.
What's interesting about what John read were the several points that sound just like the Count of St. Germain.
Exactly, yeah.
So he seemed to talk about things much older than he was, right?
It sounded intimate knowledge.
Right, recounting history as if he had been there.
Right, centuries before.
Right. He ate very little or didn't eat at all in front of people. Same kind of idea.
Yeah.
And it's at around the same time of this St. Germain character, shortly before.
Oh, you're right. There's a time period in St. Germain's history where he went to go visit someplace. And in that year period, he was missing. And then
the professor appears.
Right, the professor
with
appears.
the same kind of description and the same connections
Exactly.
of Benjamin Franklin and some of the founders. That's fascinating. Okay, and it continues. By something more than a mere coincidence, the committee appointed by the Colonial Congress to design a flag accepted an invitation to be guests while at Cambridge of the family with which the professor was staying. It was here that General Washington joined them for the purpose of deciding upon a fitting emblem. By the signs that passed between them, it was evident that General Washington and Dr. Franklin recognized the professor, and by unanimous approval he was invited to become an active member of the committee. During the proceedings which followed, the professor was treated with the most profound respect, and all his suggestions immediately acted upon. He submitted a pattern which he considered symbolically appropriate for the new flag. And this was unhesitatingly accepted by the 6 other members of the committee, who voted that the arrangement suggested by the professor be forthwith adopted.
Motion to approve the Immortal's design. I second.
After the episode of the flag,
The motion carries.
the professor quickly vanished, and nothing further is known concerning him.
This is what I like. This is what's fascinating is like in this account, there's some guy staying with his family, right? He's this interesting guy, strange guy. He's got this box of ancient manuscripts that he's deciphering. He's, he seems aloof, but he seems very congenial. He seems like he knows everything. And then what happens? Who comes to stay at this place? Coincidentally, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, trying to design the flag. They seem to recognize this guy. They seem to know who he is. So they invite him to join the conversation about how to design the flag. Every decision he makes, they say, yep, let's go with his idea. So they know this dude.
Right, this harkens back to the enigmatic, mysterious figure of the signing of the Independence who urged everyone to sign, who in his speech, his alleged speech, he made references to the Great Seal, the Eye of God, right? These things that would come to pass as being symbols of America. Is this part of this, the symbols of this ancient brotherhood carrying through the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, that supposedly our Count St. Germain was a part of?
Time makers.
Is this why there is a pyramid with an eye on the back of our dollar bill?
Yeah, that's what's suggested here.
It relates. I mean, not in this
Not for the
specific
flag.
story, there's the flag, but it is, the suggestion is that this is all part of the same sort of secret society of,
If you've never looked at a dollar bill, flip it over.
If you've never looked at it.
the pyramid with the all-seeing eye. Why in the F is that on our dollar bill?
Right.
Well, I think that most people would say the mainstream idea is it's pretty much admitted that the founding fathers were Freemasons, and it's a Freemasonic symbol.
A lot of them were, yeah.
Yeah, Washington, Franklin.
Did you know George Washington?
Pyramid with the all-seeing eye is a
Freemasonic
symbol?
Yes. Look at Washington, D.C. You see that everywhere. You see the Egyptian
with the all-seeing
obelisk. Well, that doesn't have it on the top, but
Freemasonry tracks its lineage back to ancient Egypt. So you have the pyramid. Then you have the different levels of Freemasonry.
because they borrowed that from ancient history.
You have the different 33 degrees of...
So all the stuff that we're seeing in the modern day culture with the all-seeing eye, which is everywhere at this point.
Yeah.
Well,
all of
especially
our
with the
advertising-
Illuminati now, with it being popularized.
So is it the same people? Is it the same group that is now sort of...
Well, that's
an
the
interesting
debate.
question.
That's the debate. Is it a carry-on of this? Because I think it's admitted that the founding of the nation, the way that D.C. was set up, at least to a degree, it's admitted that Freemasons, so they designed certain things to reflect their Freemason patronage or their Freemason participation.
Heritage, yeah.
Which is openly connected to ancient Egypt and some of these
Hiram Abiff and the early rites of Freemasonry.
It's a mixture of Christianity with ancient teachings, which goes back to Rosicrucianism and all this other stuff. But when it comes to like, if you're talking about like modern stuff like Jay-Z, that Illuminati stuff, how much of that is perpetuation for control, or how much of that is a fad? Like that's a whole other conversation.
I know we talked about the fad thing, but it's not a fad at this point. It's routinely used through pop culture for 20, 30 years at this point.
Right.
It's just blatant everywhere you look.
The one-eye symbolism.
The one-eye symbolism. I don't know if it's directly related to these starters of society, but whatever it is, it's being...
Well, and that's the thing, is that we need to have a conversation, because we did sort of an episode on that. I think it's now archived, but...
It's archived. You can access it if you sign up at blueful.com and click on the Patreon button. Right. Our early episodes that were...
Shameless plug.
I'm plugging it just because that's where that episode lives, because it was early on. We were,
What is it, Illuminati in the
occult
music industry or something?
Celebrity occult.
Well, we should do a deeper dive, because I think what it comes down to is the whole discussion between, like, we know this is part of our history, at least in this country, and in Europe as well. How much of it is for good? How much of it is a innocent sort of fraternity, and how much of it is there an aspect of it that's nefarious, that's sort of some control operation? That's something that we discussed in an episode. That's something that we should do another episode on, really get into that.
Yeah, I think it's enough to say that if you look at modern culture and you look at like the music industry and celebrity, you see a lot of symbology that goes way back, and a lot of it's
like
carried
children's
through.
shoes now.
Yeah, it's carried through.
It's so insane.
From it's intertangled with Freemasonry, but carried through by Rosicrucian symbolism and going back to the Knights Templar.
But is it negative? Is the question?
But in Theosophy and Rosicrucianism, there's the tie-in with the ancient Kabbalah, and you see like Madonna and these celebrities that are wearing the red wristband, right? The red thread around there.
What is the feeling you get about it? You always question it. Like, do you think there's positivity in it?
Well, I honestly think a lot of it's a fad, like we talked about. I don't.
You really think that?
Well, but I guess I don't see the harm. Okay, if we look at it the way we're looking at this episode, the way we're looking at, we should do it. Like we're going to do a deep dive on secret societies and Freemasonry.
We've looked at a lot of this stuff, though. We have, but this is just your general feeling. You think it's just a fad.
I think there's a lot of opportunists that take something that, like, if it becomes popular and it becomes this spooky conspiracy kind of thing.
In the top companies, you think it's this
give me an
expression.
example.
Like Nike shoes.
Yeah. I think of that where it's a branding thing. That could be okay. We know in the rap industry, like it's heavy. It's a very sought after idea. People are the Illuminati. People rap it all the time. So if you're Nike, you know that a lot of people in that culture buy those shoes. Why would you not put an Illuminati symbolism on your shoe and sell that? Doesn't mean that you're pushing an idea.
You don't think it has anything with ritualism?
I'm not saying that doesn't exist.
I mean,
in
all
pop
the
culture.
things that are going on in our culture right now, like the massive upheavals, the social unrest.
Yeah, I don't know how much of that is engineered by, let's say, the all-seeing eye, that branch of a secret society. I'm not saying that there's no...
what's going on in the world is natural.
No, I don't think there's anything that goes on right now that's major that there's not a secret hand involved in.
So how does that not relate to it?
Because I don't think necessarily a logo on a shoe necessarily is part of the agenda.
I think, Chris, what it sounds like you're saying is that there are people that are opportunists.
That's possible. I'm not saying there aren't, but when you see hundreds and thousands of pictures of the top celebrities, top companies, all doing the same symbolic, ritualistic acts, those are the people that are pushing the narrative. They're funneling the minds of the masses down certain roads. And if you believe a lot of these groups it's based on ritual. And when you have mass ritual by them engaging in this stuff, it creates, like, even the mask. I've been thinking about this a lot. I'm not going down this rabbit hole, but I'm just saying, if you think about Eyes Wide Shut and stuff like that, like what's happening now with the masks, I feel like it could be partly ritualistic. It's not impossible, where the culture's wearing masks in some sort of
massive ritualistic operation.
I mean, I'm just throwing that out there. Right. I don't know, but
it's very esoteric, but it is possible.
I'm not saying that I don't think that the idea of these rituals playing out in pop culture and modern society that are done on a large scale, that's not happening. I'm not saying that at all.
You're saying not every example is
not every example. And also, what is the originate? Like when we talk about the Rosicrucians, or we talk about the Freemasons, the founders, things like that, how much of it is nefarious and how much of it was there corruption at some point? Because it seems like a lot of the liturgy, a lot of the information here is that it's the idea of moving humanity in a good direction. There's a certain point where it seems like it takes a nefarious turn potentially, but that's a different conversation.
John and I were talking about this during the break, but the idea that you have a group, right, early on, you could talk about the Rosicrucians, the early Freemasons at the higher levels, especially Manly P. Hall, where he talks about ushering in a new age and a secret order, secret knowledge being passed down that the masses should not have access to because it can corrupt the value of those alchemical sciences, those mystery schools. So it's an elite group that gets the information, and based on their understanding and based on their will, they will shape the destiny of humankind. So even if you could say, like, they may have good intentions initially, or they could have good intentions now, regardless, if you believe in free and independent thought and free choice, you're robbed of that if a secret hidden hand is guiding. And I'm not saying that everything that they do is nefarious, but it's a secret. It's
the idea of social engineering.
And
we're being socially engineered to the nth degree right now.
And as JFK would say, what did he say? We are as a nation opposed to secret societies. Right. So that's that famous quote.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
But it's true. We must believe in open and free information, freedom of speech.
I agree.
Freedom to...
And the individual.
And the
rights.
individual, yeah. And of course, there are masses, but the problem is you create a mob when you do not educate the masses with, especially if there's like these secret symbols and mystery schools. You hold that back, then you create a mob you can control.
Right. But I guess my point was, in regards to this episode, the idea of Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, completely opposed to the idea of a tyrannical government telling you what you should do and think. Their whole thing was about individuality and freedom of speech. Right. The whole purpose, at least of their Freemasonry, was to give a country to a people that wanted to have their own individuality.
And this goes into another topic where there is an argument that through Freemasonry, there was a corruption of Freemasonry by the Bavarian Illuminati that came through the Scottish Rite.
Which is an episode we should do.
Right. But right now we're just talking about specifically the founding of the country, which had great ideals in the sense of breaking off the chains of a monarchy, a constitutional republic where the people get to elect and decide, but there's a set of laws that protect the rights of the individual. Like that's all important. And that's what this is all about.
Yeah, and we haven't even gotten to the vampire.
And we haven't gotten to the vampire.
We got a train in the background, though.
Yeah.
All right, before we get into the vampire stuff, which is fascinating, we kind of talked about the professor and his implications that he may be the same character at the founding, which could be Count de St Germain, the Immortal. Before we get into his connection with the vampire, right, and the manuscript that he wrote called the Triangular Manuscript, which is fascinating in its own right, we're going to take a break.
So many rabbit holes.
And when we take this break, we're going to give you guys a quick preview of our expansion episode on...
Ouija boards gone wild.
Yeah, Chris is really excited about this.
If you want some good Ouija board stories, this is the episode to listen to.
Talk about some creepy hidden knowledge coming from potentially disembodied spirit connections, right? I mean, in the sense that it is... A lot of the stuff, like the mystics and the Gnostics and the Theosophists, there's a connection to, not specifically speaking to the dead, but
I see. You're trying to
this mystical
tie in this episode to the expansion episode.
If you want secret knowledge of the beyond, you go to the Ouija board, which I don't recommend, but we have a book about it.
Yeah, this is a great collection. There's contemporary stories, unheard stories. There's also stories from newspaper collections from like the 20s and 30s. We're going to pick the best and we're going to cover them. I mean, the Ouija board is a fascinating device. We've talked about it in episodes before. You can think what you want about it. You have your own personal perspectives on whether it's good or bad. Was it the demons, as John might suggest? Is it more of an indifferent sort of device that it's a doorway to either a good or bad or just indifferent?
Doorway to the devil.
Oh, John might think. Okay, that's John's point of view.
You don't want to mess with the Ouija board. I'm going to go with the Art Bell advice.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all kind of are in agreement with that.
I've used it before, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Most of the stories in here are sort of foreboding, warning stories. There's stories that are a little more like, oh, that isn't that interesting.
Maybe you should get some lottery tickets.
Right. Oh, there's a lot of that. Most people lose all their livelihood when they do that. According to the Ouija board in this book, we're going to get into some of that stuff.
They lose their livelihood?
Well, there's people that lose a lot of money.
Like they gamble with it?
Oh yeah. Because the phenomenon with the Ouija board is it's anything that comes from a sort of spiritual source, whether it's Ouija boards or psychics or tarot cards. If you get direct advice to do something, most people think because it is of a spiritual nature, because it's something you can't see, they have knowledge that you're not aware of.
Supernatural information.
Right. What a lot of people don't understand is that a lot of these guys are
trickster spirits.
Tricksters. Or
I would say all
John would
of
say
them
demons. Maybe not. I mean, I think there are legit cases of...
No, you're not going to find a benevolent being through a Ouija board, in my opinion.
I think there's an argument to be made that it can be used as a conduit to... I think it's always a risk. Do I think that it's always some dark force that comes through? No, I think that there are spirits that might come through, but I think...
Oh, you're wrong.
You're rolling the dice. Rolling the dice.
Well, this is where we can agree to disagree.
Well, roll the dice with us on the expansion episode.
It's true. You should do that.
Either way.
We got a stinger.
Oh, we do.
All right.
Before we go to break, let's play a stinger from a stinger level patron, which are rare nowadays.
Nikki Rice.
Should I tell my little story?
This is for Nicole, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, the stinger's for Nicole, but this is for Joe.
Her hubby.
Her hubby.
You have a special memory.
If it wasn't for your family, Joe, I would have never watched a horror movie.
This is interesting.
When I remember growing up and spending a lot of time with Rob, your brother, growing up at your house, and I remember your mom kept trying to get me to watch horror movies. I don't remember which ones.
It was his mom.
It was his mom, yeah.
Nice.
It was, I don't know what horror, it was just scary movies, and I did not want to.
John, you got to watch Candyman with me.
I don't remember what it was.
Fascinating.
I think that was before Candyman.
It's the opposite of our mom, who was like, she hated all things horror.
I loved your mom. I love both your parents, by the way.
His parents are so sweet.
Yeah, they're awesome people.
What did his dad always say to you?
Johnny, baby.
That's right.
Every time I saw him. Good old Ron. Anyways.
This is for Nikki.
This is for Nikki.
Nikki, good friend of ours from the hometown.
Hello, this is Chris. Please leave a message after the tone.
Chris, don't ever deny my call ever again.
That's her voicemail, right?
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Chris, Nikki and Joe. Your number one fucking fan of this beautiful podcast. I love the nitty gritty. I love the spooky stuff, conspiracy, the nitty gritty. Oh, this opinion, that opinion, that opinion. Like, let's get into some like JFK shit. Let's get into some conspiracy, like your vaccine shit. That episode, I really enjoyed it. Conspiracy. I have my own opinion because I have a child, but I don't like to each their own, man.
Yeah, that's
just
right.
Don't get my kids sick. Oh, wait, hold on. Oh, I'm beep. That means my time is up. Call me back. Call us back tonight. Now, what else are you doing?
That is a good question. What else are you doing, Chris?
I think I'm with nothing. That's good.
So that's obviously some voicemail compilation.
Yes.
With some Jackson 5 inspired.
Yeah, definitely
music
Jackson 5
behind.
feel.
Very upbeat.
Yeah.
I like that.
Thank you, Nikki, for your voicemails.
I like that she likes the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
Like get into
I know.
the dirty, edgy conspiracy
we
stuff.
had a little nitty gritty in this one. Like, yeah, I like the nitty.
We have a lot of more nitty gritty conversations off the air, and sometimes that's in the expansion. So if you want to hear some of the more, if you got a little
I'd
bit
like
of
to
thicker
bring
skin,
the nitty gritty into our conversations, but
On the main
I'm getting
feed.
a little pushback over
Yeah,
here.
I like to keep it.
You like to keep
calm
it
and collected in the whole. Not calm and collected. I like the whole to be a place of distraction from the craziness of the world.
Sometimes it's good to have our opinions on the craziness in the world.
Right. Well, we might get to that, but as for right now, if you're interested in hearing some more,
Nitty-gritty.
maybe controversial conversations, head on to Patreon because that's where
if you're not too
if you love us enough to sign up for the Patreon, you might love us enough to not get offended by some sort of opinion we have.
Yeah, it's all about conversation. I love Nikki's perspective about
To each
the
their own,
nitty-gritty.
man.
To each their own. She has her opinions. We
Right.
can have everyone can have their opinions. The point is you got to talk about it. And that's what makes life interesting. Even if it's, especially nowadays, when it's dangerous to say certain things, it's important to be able to talk about it, you know? Which is why we'll hide it behind a paywall, go over to our expansion episodes and off
For
the
now.
cuffs. No, but
It's a dangerous
seriously,
time. We've talked about censorship before on the show, and it is an interesting time for free speech, for free voices, and
There's certain things you can't talk about anymore.
it's really sad.
Yeah, it sucks because you can't. I mean, you have to censor yourself.
well,
to some
the
degree.
hard thing is, I think forever and always, the truth will be you needed to be able to talk about things to
That's
really
why
to make
it's
up
the
your
First
mind.
Amendment. They
Right.
knew how important.
Right on this 4th of July episode, it's still an important frickin' amendment.
As long as you're not hurting anyone physically, you should have the right to express your point of view. Because if not, it festers. You push people underground, and you're not allowed to talk anymore. It causes violence.
The
in the long
dangerous thing
term.
is when you start to, and I think the founders, people have their opinions, especially now about the founders and, their different characters and their choices in life. But one thing that they recognize that I think is still absolutely true to this day is if you censor people from voicing their own opinions, then you don't have a discussion where it really allows people to understand other people's points of view, and you don't have the ability to decide for yourself what the truth is. And if you start to censor some people, even if you disagree with them, even if what you think they say is abhorrent, if you start to censor those people, then you start to build this sort of road to tyranny, this sort of road to fascism, really. That's what
Yeah,
it
and
becomes.
It's just one size fits all.
Well, and then you get tribal
Anger.
collectives. And especially when it comes to like, hey, if they're censoring that, and I agree with some of what they're saying, and they censor that, you're going to go full steam into what's underground. And I think the best thing that you can have in an open society is
to
open
have all
speech.
the ideas in the open. So
Exactly.
you can find the ones that are bad too.
Right.
Yeah.
Like if you say you can't say that anymore for whatever reason, then you force people underground and you make people upset and they form, you know what I
And
mean?
they, and they
Like,
don't
it
get
festers.
to, and they don't get to hear the debate
Right,
about
exactly.
it.
And then you can't prove people wrong. It's,
Right.
It's part of the reason I think there's such incredible censorship right now is because there's a lot of amazing ideas that really could help humanity in a
Yes.
lot of amazing ways, but it would mess up the power structure.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this whole like idea of censoring and like hate speech and things like that really come down to monopolizing ideologies where you
Yeah.
can't talk because there's power invested.
Yeah, whether you're left or right, you should agree that censoring people from any point of view is dangerous. You should have these conversations for future generations.
As long as
the
you're
sake
not
of future,
inciting violence.
Exactly. For future generations, you should be having these conversations because you know what? There's been these divides in countries since the beginning of man. There's been these conflicts. There's different shades of it, but always these same conflicts come up. If you start to censor the conversation, if you start to pretend like one side isn't having this discussion, then you start to grow this cancerous mass
And
that John was talking about.
The biggest danger I see is you start censoring, you go down that road of these keywords are censored. Anyone that utters this or has this opinion is bad. You vilify an entire group that may agree with you 99% on everything, but there's one thing that they say, they become the villain, and then you divide a people, and then you turn your neighbors into your enemies. And that's when we lose our communities. That's when we lose the ability to communicate and to talk and to bring up new, great ideas because everyone's afraid to communicate. Everyone looks at each other like either a potential
and you're stopping
enemy.
research from history too. If you start erasing past and you don't have access to the true information anymore because it's not allowed to be there,
then how do you stop it from happening again?
There's no way to even
Reminds
understand
me
what's
of-
going on
There's
anymore.
this great book, and I think it was made into a movie, which probably wasn't great. But there's a great book called The Giver. The idea was there was a guy.
Not the Giving Tree.
No, that's also a great book. The Giver was it was basically like there was a society, kind of runs a Brave New World way, where there's a society where everybody is given an occupation when they reach, pubescence, when they reach like adolescence. They become apprentices to a certain occupation. There's one person in the community who is an apprentice to the Giver. The Giver is the one guy who has all the stored knowledge, all the things that no one else knows.
Everything that was deleted.
It consists of religions. It consists of, animals used to be real. They weren't, like elephants are now monsters because no one has seen them. So they're like stuffed animals. It's this collection of history that's dangerous now because there were religions that pitted people against each other. It's this idea of the ancient history. So this Giver has all this information. He gives it to one guy. That guy gets a hold of all the information. It's seeing in color. because everybody's medicated to the degree where if you can see in color, everybody has passion. There is more conflict because you can see these colors and there's more, all that excitement.
Yeah,
so everybody's dumbed
emotion.
down. So this one kid he has this burden of holding all this information of what humanity used to be, which was passion, color, religion, faith, spirituality, emotion. And he has to be the one guy who will never share it with anyone, but give it to the next giver. And that is, I think, the allegory, I think the message in that, write in if you think I'm wrong, but the message seems if we become a society where there's only one person or no one that has that information.
Or very few.
Right, then we're doomed to repeat the same things that wherever we get to in society, if we hide those things away and we forget about those things, they will come back. That is the nature of humanity.
You have to learn from your mistakes.
Yeah. I mean, we're repeating history right now. Like, history rhymes. It doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And what's going on in our country right now is echoes of the past. It's all around the world right now. And if you don't understand the past, you're going to be doomed to repeat it.
And it can be clouded and cloaked in a shroud of goodness and goodwill and intent.
That's usually how totalitarian authoritarians work.
If they pull on certain emotions to
mislead,
better mankind by burying a certain aspect of history and a certain thought process of other people, and then you define what is good, and then you falsely define the alternative side and create a villain of your neighbor, of anyone with any kind of dissimilar idea, then you create monsters within your own community and you destroy a country from within.
Divide and conquer. Oldest trick in the book.
Right. And look like at independence, right? We're talking about this guy who came into the Declaration, signed
it's all coming back.
Go away from Britain. Like in the day, you couldn't say anything about the king, right? You couldn't criticize the monarch. That's why they came to this new world, right? Granted, all of the problems that came with that and all the injustices that happened, but the urge to find freedom, the urge to be able to speak your mind and have an opinion, that was the impetus for the founding of this country. And that's why it's important on this 4th of July, not like I'm a super patriotic guy, but I am in the sense that like this stuff is important.
Yeah,
freedom of speech.
Speak your mind, people.
Yeah, freedom in general.
Whatever your view is, the discussion is important.
Right. No matter your race, creed, color, you have to be able to speak your mind and think how you think and share it with people.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, the world is going in a bad direction.
That's part of your humanity. It's a basic tenet of humanity.
Absolutely.
Think.
Freedom of thought.
Let's move on.
I know you're talking about monsters. I knew we weren't going to get. Are we going to get to the vampire stuff?
Yeah. Well, hold on. So, anyways, enjoy this expansion preview.
I want vampires.
Crap. We didn't even go to the break.
No, we got into the stinger.
I want vampires.
I want the nitty gritty.
Wow, that was like 15 minutes of just.
That was all thanks to Nicole. That was all banter about freedom of thought and the nitty gritty conspiracy stuff.
Yeah, that was a little nitty gritty.
It's 4th of July, so forgive us some real conversation about the Bill of Rights.
Yes. Anyways, enjoy this expansion preview, and we will see you on the other side.
With vampires.
And we will get back into the vampires and the immortals that started this country.
With vampires.
Gleeful expansion episode preview.
Access granted.
They opened the door.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's stories that are seemingly innocuous, but it is a doorway. And when you open that doorway,
you're offering a hand into the other dimension.
Right, you don't know who's on the other side. It is exciting. It is this mystery. It is the age-old question of, is there life after death? Can I find evidence? I want to know what's going on. I'd like to...
Just want to hang out with a ghost.
Yeah, or whatever. Or even it's partially that feeling of a kid when you're young and you want to believe in magic.
Yeah.
It's that same sort of thing. Like, I want a little bit of mystery magic in my life.
It's like a superpower.
Yeah, it's part of the compelling aspect of it. But it is a doorway. And even though there are some innocuous accounts, there are plenty of accounts where something does come through that maybe you didn't plan on coming through, but you don't really get to choose.
Exactly. You're throwing your reel into a place that you don't know what's underneath.
Right, there might be alligator gar in there.
Most likely it's alligator gar and sharks, and not like a
bluegill
guppy.
Or a manatee.
Or a mermaid.
Manatees are adorable.
Well, those are the stories that you're going to hear from people, because the dark ones are the ones that people are going to recount, because that's the drama.
Well, I think that's who wants to, play with humans.
Go in that little room in the basement and go in the wine cellar and then take that phone app that just spits out words and ask it questions.
Oh, that sounds scary right now.
Is scary.
Even though I'm 5 Coors Lights in, that still sounds kind of scary right now.
I bet you'd get something. When I did that in my house last time, I got a bite, and it fucked with my dog.
Do you want me to bring that back in here?
No, I don't. I'm joking. But
You know,
it could happen.
That's
though.
the thing is like
It might happen tonight.
Like these people that have had the experience with Ouija boards, I am intrigued. It is compelling. I often want to pull out the Ouija board that I have and do it, but I never do because I always think at the end of the day,
Yeah.
I don't want that darkness in my life. If I open that doorway, I'd have no control over that because I've had
it's compelling
experiences.
because you know, if you get a bite, it confirms
It's exciting.
a lot of, it means there's something else that we can't see in the
It's
universe.
a little taste of magic.
Something other than Polar Pops and Circle K and the
Right.
DMV.
and
something magical.
politics and there's a whole uncharted world of reality that no one talks about. Probably influences our world a lot.
Yeah, we just can't see it.
It gives you a glimpse into the unseen world that's just
Right.
behind the veil.
Hi.
Hi.
Welcome back, guys.
Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed that expansion preview
Yes.
of the Ouija boards.
Ouija.
It's going to be a fun episode.
It's gonna be a great one.
Excited about
We're
it.
finally getting into, speaking of Ouija boards and demonology, we're finally getting into the vampire aspect of the Count of St. Germain. Finally.
Feels like it's been a long time because we've had a lot of conversations.
It's been a
off-air
long night
since
for
then.
us. Yeah, it's 1:52 a.m. right now.
Wow, we've had a lot of off-air beliefful conversations
and
right
several
now.
drinks. So anyway, how about the vampire connection
Yes.
with St. Germain? So we mentioned earlier, one of the last alleged sightings of St. Germain took place in Louisiana, New Orleans, to
Okay.
be precise. Now we're going to get into Jacques St. Germain.
Okay, so this gets into the weird vampire aspect. Okay, so when I was researching St. Germain, right, the Count of St. Germain, and the immortality, I started to pick up these subtle inferences, these hints of his influence on modern culture. He's an immortal. He drinks the elixir of life, aka, I don't know, some could say blood, right? Which of course is not part of his history. His history is the elixir of life, the philosopher's stone. There's actually a guy I was looking at on YouTube who's in Hawaii who tells you how to make the St. Germain's elixir.
Bullshit.
Which
I'm
well,
sure.
No, it was actually kind of interesting. He
Cool.
it reminded me, remember Dan the Man?
Friends with Jim Humble?
Yeah, the Universal Church, yeah. But it reminded me of
Sorry.
the stuff we used to, like the juicing and the cleansing. But what's interesting is like he showed how to make it. And apparently it's open source information. But he collected the morning dew and filtered it through a coffee
beautiful.
press
That's pretty amazing.
and added some other things. And like I said,
he
like,
filtered the morning dew.
yes, he went out in the springtime.
That's awesome.
Isn't it? So he's in Hawaii. We'll put a link to this guy in the
I
show
mean,
notes.
that's just it blows my
That
mind.
seems like bullshit.
What makes it more
Is he
authentic?
selling it?
No.
Okay.
It's he shows you how to make it, but he also
He
links.
doesn't sell the recipe?
He links where you can find, like, I guess St. Germain's actual, like,
I mean, I
recipe.
don't know how good that is for you, but it sounds awesome.
But he so he collects the morning dew, or it's just water.
What
it's
is
just,
he,
it's
like
the
a
breath of
leprechaun?
God, you know? It's the breath of God drifting upon the leaves
no, it's
of,
awesome.
of the morning.
Dew is wonderful.
Yeah. So you can only collect it during the spring. And he's in Hawaii, and there's a very brief window where he can collect it, but he was collecting it and putting it through a filter and then adding other certain things. And he's,
Mountain Dew?
promoting using it, but he doesn't sell anything that I could see. We'll link to his video in the show notes. I think he has 400 views and 2 likes on his YouTube video, which to me adds authenticity to what he's doing, but it's fascinating. But this idea that he had this elixir, right? But of course, we're going to twist it now. We're going to go to the
dark side.
the inspiration of the modern vampire. Because what is interesting is that according to the last fella he was staying with, right? Prince Hess or King of whoever, whatnot.
Past the castle?
Yeah, the castle. Hassel
like that.
Castle. He was staying with this king. This is his official death. Of course, there was no official burial.
Right,
He
right.
wasn't there to see him die. But he supposedly confided in him that he was the son of Prince Francis II Rákóczi of Transylvania. Transylvania. So he's an immortal. The best possible official scenario of his lineage comes from being a prince of Transylvania who has an elixir of immortality, right? All of these things to me sound like an inspiration for Dracula.
It was interesting
Right?
because
Here's my elixir for immortality.
That's great, John. Coors Light will take you all the way.
I'll take you all the way.
it is interesting because the signet of the original vampire, Vlad Dracul, the actual historical figure,
Yes,
was the dragon, right?
It's another connection.
Yeah, and what's in this image right here?
Okay, so there are two written works attributed to St. Germain, the Count of St. Germain, one of which is the Most Holy Trinosophia, which I'm not going to get into here, but it's attributed to him according to Manly P. Hall.
And this is fascinating too because it wasn't deciphered until 2009.
No, this is a different one. This
Okay.
is the first one that's attributed to him. What is interesting about this document is it is ciphered, and it contains, according to researchers, the most elaborate cipher known to man. It has combinations of Sumerian, Egyptian hieroglyphics, all kinds of ancient languages, twisted and written, French upside down backwards. And to this day, I don't know if anyone has transcribed it, but the other manuscript, the one that I'm interested in today, is called the Triangular Manuscript. So this was also acquired by Manly P. Hall by way of another Freemason from France.
He's got his fingers in everything.
He sure does. But what's interesting about this one to me is this one actually has his name on the manuscript. It's shaped like a triangle.
Oh, I see it right here in the image. That's
The manuscript begins with a short Latin inscription mentioning that this is a gift given by Count of St. Germain, followed by an illustration of a winged dragon.
Like Vlad Dracula's family.
Exactly. So this is another connection to the idea of Dracula, the dragon, the one who feeds on blood for immortality. This concept that carries forth. What's interesting is after that first Latin inscription with his name and the dragon, everything beyond that point is written in cipher. And this is an ancient text from the 1700s. And what do we know about Count St. Germain?
He's immortal.
He's immortal. He's rich, and
No one sees him
he's
eat.
an alchemist.
Mesmerizing eyes.
Mesmerizing eyes. But there's this book attributed to him that no one knew what it was, other than it has his name in it, because no one could decipher it until 2011.
Yeah, that's what's
This
interesting.
was a good year.
Finally deciphered in 2011, it describes, guess what? Just like everyone thought about the Count of St. Germain, it describes, after finally being deciphered in 2011, a magical ritual by which one can perform the two most extraordinary feats that characterize the legend of Count St. Germain, namely the procurement of great wealth and the extension of life.
So this was written by the Count of St. Germain when? 1700s?
Mhm.
And wasn't deciphered until 2011.
Right. So the legend of
incredible.
him being immortal,
Right.
whether or not this is true, whether or not he was immortal, whatever, this book is supposedly written by him. It comes from that time period. No one doubts that. And it tells one how to attain immortality.
It is interesting because like he told all of his friends and everybody in the court that he was 300 years old and he had this elixir of
At
life.
least.
And then he wrote this book apparently. And then
Where's the book?
It's right here,
Probably
John.
available on Google now. Everything is available on Google.
No, this is the thing. It's available at the Getty Library in Los Angeles, which is a visual arts
There's
library.
no Amazon Prime options.
Initially, it belonged to Manly P. Hall, stored in his library. I don't know if you can get the full deciphered transcript.
you can.
I think you can only visit it at the Getty Visual Arts
So
Library.
there's no way we can read the immortal life sequence.
That's the secret. They're keeping it.
Wait, what's it called? I'm going to look up right now.
I want to read it.
Yeah.
It's called the Triangular Manuscript.
I'm pretty sure I saw this on Amazon Prime. Triangular.
I'm pretty sure I saw it.
The Triangular Book of St. Germain. Here's multiple images. I mean, you can Wikipedia it. I tried to get this off of several, kind of off the
Oh, it's on
radar.
Goodreads.
Oh, yeah? The whole translation? But look at this.
The Triangular Manuscript of St. Germain. Hardcover, January 1st, 2011. When it was published.
Seriously?
Oh, wait, but there's no price option. You can't buy it.
I don't think
It's just listed.
That's the
Weird.
thing.
You can't be immortal, John.
I don't think you
Damn
can
it.
access unless anyone out there who
It looks
knows,
like a
knows about the
planchette.
Triangular Manuscript.
It is the book is literally triangular.
Yeah, this is
That's
that's the
cool.
book, John. It's an equilateral triangle with the
Weird.
dragon on the front, and everything beyond that is a cipher that was not deciphered until 2011, which I find
That's-
fascinating.
that's cool, yeah.
And then once it was deciphered, it corroborated at least his belief that he could extend his life
Right.
and incur great wealth.
That's what's interesting about this is like he told all his friends he was immortal and he had this elixir to life. It is interesting that in 2011 they finally translated the book that he allegedly wrote, and it talks about that elixir of life and the ingredients that makes that elixir. That is fascinating. I would like to read it. I don't like that it's not available on
The
Amazon.
Triangular
That
Manuscript.
bums me out.
If anyone out there, any of our listeners can access the full transcript of the Triangular Manuscript, send us an email. Leave a speak pipe for 90 seconds.
I'm sure that'll encompass all of the thoughts in the book.
Absolutely will.
Well, let's get to Jacques St. Germain.
Okay,
so the vampire. Finally, the vampire.
We set up the connections to the vampire lore. Like, it could see how that, when I read all this about him, it seemed like it would have inspired Dracula to some extent. And there are books on that now, I found, where people believe that a lot of the inspiration came from him because he was an immortal from Transylvania.
Well, now he has there's a character, there's a book series where he's a character and he is a vampire. He's also in like this other, what's that show that
Outlander.
all the ladies love?
Yeah, I heard he's in Outlander.
I could try to watch it. That first opening with the monologue was just too cheesy. Sorry if you like Outlander. I know I should give it another try.
Oh, weird anecdote. The guy in 1972 claimed to be Count de St Germain reincarnated, who eventually committed suicide allegedly.
Mm-hmm.
When he died, they made a biopic movie about the life of his
silly.
His previous wife, the singer. Her name was like Deanna or Diana or something. Anyways, she was a famous French singer. And in the biopic, the guy who played his character,
the Count St. Germain,
Immortal, right, was Christopher Lambert. Do you know who Christopher Lambert is?
No.
He is the guy who played Highlander, the Immortal in the science fiction movie. So Immortal, playing an Immortal. I don't think that's that compelling of evidence. I think that's
the Illuminati telling us that he was immortal.
That's most likely.
But that's just a weird...
It's possible.
It's a weird synchronicity.
Anyways, let's get into Jacques St. Germain of New Orleans.
So you think this is the same guy?
This is the argument.
Okay.
And you're familiar, we talked about Interview with the Vampire. Basically, the Lestat character is based off this character, who is...
Tom Cruise.
Well, it's Tom Cruise. But he is the Count St. Germain. In 1902, a man named Jacques St. Germain arrived in the New Orleans, Louisiana scene and took up residence at 1041 Royal Street. The home is now part of a vampire tour and is privately owned. He was a handsome cavalier, a ladies' man, and was often out and about in the French Quarter's social scene, whether hosting or out at clubs. He was very fond of throwing lavish dinner parties for socialites. Invitations were highly sought after due to the food, fine wine, and entertainment. St. Germain would often regale his guests with stories of his vast travels through France, Italy, Egypt, and other parts of Africa. So just like the previous St. Germain.
Why
same
is he
stories.
called St. Germain?
He named himself that.
Really?
I think it's
It
still
was
a
one of
mystery.
his many
He had
pseudonyms.
like 40
Moniker?
aliases. Yeah.
I'm not trying to get sidetracked.
That's all right.
Curious.
That's a good question because Jacques St. Germain claimed to be the son of St. Germain. The guy who shows up, which would make sense in the time period, would be his son, the age period.
Another incarnation. Maybe.
Right. But the argument is that he didn't die. He left and went to New Orleans and just pretended to be his son because people would see him and be like, you look just like this guy. He's like, oh, it's my dad. Because he didn't age. And it was 50 years later or whatever.
Yeah, he admitted that he basically took on a bunch of different names that weren't his own, which was not uncommon at the time, I guess.
It's not really a name, though.
Count de St. Germain? What's a title?
The Count of St. Germain.
He had multiple titles as a lot of nobility
It's not
at
like
the time.
Jeremy or something
No,
cool
well,
like
I could
that.
say
People
like...
weren't really named that back then.
Jeremy's such a cool name, though.
Is it?
Why wouldn't you pick Jeremy?
I hate my name.
I've grown to love it.
So clumsy.
I've grown to love your name.
But that was not an uncommon thing to do. Like, I could say I am the Count of Doylestown. And
you might have 10 monikers.
The preeminent,
Count of
like you can
Doyle.
give all these monikers to yourself. It wasn't abnormal in the 1700s. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm the royal apostate of Warwick County.
That's hilarious. I'm the Count of Doylestown.
So it wasn't abnormal to have a lot of different names for yourself, but the interesting thing always was about St. Germain is he never gave his actual origin name. So this guy Jacques in New Orleans, Jacques of St. Germain, said he was the son of St. Germain. So he was often described as being highly intelligent, a patron of the arts, a master of languages, just like St. Germain, very wealthy and very fond of Bourbon Street.
Who isn't?
St. Germain had a solid grasp of English since he had come over from Paris, France. He could in fact speak several languages fluently: English, French, Spanish, and Italian, as noted in tales told about him. He would often talk about things that he had witnessed decades and centuries before, leaving his guests slightly confused and even more enamored with him. Which sounds just like St. Germain from 1760s. Right. He even claimed that he was a direct descendant of Count St. Germain from Louis XV's court. Some guests would compare portraits of the Count with Jacques. They were positive that he must be related since he looked nearly identical. They were even roughly the same age. Interesting, if you're immortal and pretending to be the son of the same person. Jacques would neither confirm nor deny being the Count. This simply led to more mystery to his person. Jacques' parties were highly sought after, but several people noted that he never...
I kind of want to go.
To one of his parties?
Yeah.
I would go.
Sounds fun.
Just wear a scarf. Like a lead scarf.
Maybe like a leather.
High collar.
Leather turtleneck. It's a new rage. Jacques' parties were highly sought after, but several people noted that he never partook in dining with his guests. Interesting. He simply entertained as they dined and always drank from a rather fancy chalice, presumably filled with wine.
Blood.
Right?
New Orleans is a
big vampire culture. New Orleans.
It's a spooky town.
You know, there is a whole vampire culture there now that's a group of, there's like 50 admitted vampires in New Orleans that are on the registry.
They're pretenders.
Well, they say that they have a medical condition, they have to drink blood. They don't have the other abilities or aspects to their vampirismness, but they are a protected class.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, so these rumors took a sinister turn several months after St. Germain's arrival to New Orleans when the police were called to St. Germain's home to investigate the circumstances leading to a woman who had seemingly fallen to her death from his balcony.
His guest, a woman who was rumored to have been a prostitute, had in fact leapt from his balcony rather than fallen, as bystanders had originally surmised. While she survived the fall, she was terrified. People on the street surrounded her and tended to her needs while help was rounded. Hysterical, the woman ranted that she had jumped to escape St. Germain, who had bitten her neck. She screamed and sobbed out her story, claiming she was only able to escape when her assailant was briefly distracted by a rather loud knocking on his door. I don't like the St. Germain very much anymore.
Well, again, we'll get into this.
The woman was taken to the hospital as soon as possible, and the police, suspecting that she had become delusional, told the very well-known, affluent, and respected St. Germain not to bother coming in for questioning at this late hour, but rather to please visit the police station in the morning to go over the accounts of the evening.
Dicks.
The next morning, St. Germain never appeared at the police station. In fact, to everyone's chagrin, he had completely vanished overnight, leaving the majority of his belongings behind. Legend contends that upon entering his house, the police discovered a series of open but corked wine bottles.
We got a lot of weird wine bottles here, Sarge.
Upon closer investigation, they found that the large collection of bottles were filled with a strange mixture of wine and human blood.
Sounds like you see where this is going.
Jacques St. Germain was never seen again. He disappeared just as mysteriously as he had arrived. As one can only imagine, his contemporaries were shocked at this scandal, feeling both betrayed and fooled, and probably a little disappointed that the fun had come to an end. According to Michael Murphy's book, Fear Dat New Orleans, there are ongoing sightings of Vampire Jack in New Orleans. In 1933, the New Orleans police were called to Royal Street, where for 2 consecutive nights, women were found with their throats torn out, and they were drained of blood. A witness claims to have seen the man scale a 12-foot wall to make his escape.
Well, that all sounds made up.
Oh,
It sounds nothing like
yeah.
the Count de St Germain that we discuss all the time.
That's true.
He traded his grass dew elixir of life for prostitute blood.
I think there might be
Prostitute blood.
there might be some truth to the account, but obviously it seems exaggerated. A lot of hyperbole.
It sounds like someone wrote it after watching Interview with the
Right, and there's
Vampire.
not a lot of historical references that relate to the story other than like tourist blogs and things
I
like
say
that.
condemn him.
Damn him!
I say he's real and condemn
He's
him.
a racist and a vampire.
He hates women, obviously.
He's a misogynist, racist vampire. The worst of the kind.
So I don't think he was a real guy. I think, well, but it is interesting. Like, I think that, okay, the idea of this is Jacques St. Germain, I don't know. The historical references are slim. The idea that there is this, in 1933, this guy, Jack, who was creepy, that's still to this day.
Where did you get this from?
Do you want the
the rest were like historically referenced.
I'll give you
writings
sources,
of
sir.
Saint.
I'll give you sources.
King Louis.
This is from a lot of the same sources that I pulled from earlier.
Yeah.
There's less. All the other sources had more other sources backing them up. This was kind of like it got
So
thinner.
from Nosferatu.com.
Exactly.
Is it from like New Orleans Inn?
Yeah, ancientorigins.net.
blog.
Ancientorigins.net and Finding Count Germain, which we used for a lot of this because a lot of it's historical. But yes, it is thin with the sources. There's only like 1 or 2. And it does seem heavy in the narrative.
And it totally changes his
Exaggeration.
character as
Yeah.
far as like he was like a charming guy who, there was no.
Well, he was he charmed her and then he bit her.
Yeah, what if the
true.
entire time in the 1700s he was
I
just
don't understand
feeding?
how that goes against his personality, to be honest,
Well, I
because
guess
that was private.
You don't hear references to
He got
the
caught.
drinking of blood unless King Louis helped hide.
Well, they were all doing
his-
it back then, didn't you? We talked about Báthory earlier. They're all doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the Hollywood pedophile
No
thing.
one,
So
maybe no one
it's
thought to mention
probably
it 'cause it's
true.
common.
It's probably true.
I
don't
feel
know.
like it could be true.
I don't know. I like to think, well, if you listen to, I doubt that Theosophists would agree with this last incarnation of St. Germain,
No,
the
they
jacque.
would not. They would be offended by it.
They would be like,
Madame
an ascended
Blavatsky's-
master would not be drinking the blood of prostitutes
Right.
on Bourbon
He
Street.
would only drink the blood of virgins.
I don't think he'd drink any blood.
willing virgins.
That's a whole other.
An ascended master?
Yeah, ascended master. You're not going to want to bite anybody.
Really?
Yeah.
This is Madame Blavatsky says
Mhm.
this?
She'd be rolling over in her grave if she heard what you just said about Saint Germain.
Jacques Saint Germain.
Madame Blavatsky is...
She's the founder of the Theosophical Society.
Isn't she like associated with Aleister Crowley and stuff?
Aleister Crowley was
not in the way you're
inspired.
thinking, though.
Aleister
No.
Crowley was inspired by her writings of the.
I remember you talking about her.
The
in
idea of the
regards-
ascended masters, the idea that there is a group of people that are trying to push humanity to good. Aleister Crowley was intrigued by that concept. There was a book.
Didn't Madame Blavatsky, though, do some weird shit, though?
I think she seems strange because she is her religion, the Theosophy, is a mixture of mysticism and Christianity.
She
but
didn't
there's-
have any
There's no
strange
like
practices or
satanic.
anything?
No, there's nothing like that. I mean, there's mysticism, there's mediumship, but there's no like drinking
Like
of
channeling
blood
and stuff?
No. Maybe channeling and mediumship.
Aleister
The
Crowley
spiritualism is-
definitely took her stuff and then had a new kind of twist, which involved a lot more. Like he had writings, of course, about like the debauchery of man to push through to the next ascended level.
Here's the difference. So Aleister Crowley, when he was first interested in the idea of this, he heard about this idea of the masters of what was it? The Council of Light, which was by a guy called Karl von Eckhausen in 1752. He was pointed toward this guy's work, but this guy's work was not demonic. It was not satanic. It was an idea of there's a Council of Light, basically like it's sort of Christian background that's pointing people to humanity to a direction of positivity. But he was in search of this, so he looked at this. So there's a connection with that. Wherever he went after that, that was not this guy's thing. But the connection is Helena Blavatsky, the Masters of the Hidden Brotherhood, is a similar idea of the Council of Light, and that's the same idea extrapolated. We'll do a whole episode on this, but it's not all the same thing. There are different connections, and they all go through back and forth through
But
time.
Aleister Crowley's interpretation was an interpretation and extrapolation of these old mystery schools, but then, they brought
weren't all
into
bad.
his own interpretation, which, of course, that gets into our episode about the conjuring of the beast of Loch Ness.
Right, you can see the corruption of some of these ideas.
Summoning demons or the kings
They
of
wanted
hell.
to
and
summon
all
the
that stuff.
demons to make the world better.
Right, that was the idea behind.
I don't buy that.
Right,
But it came from.
but that was a fun episode.
Came from Solomon. Came from Solomon, biblical guy who could control demons, who was on, the side of right, the side of God, but who did practice Solomonic magic to control demons for the good of mankind. Aleister Crowley tried to repeat the same
He
ceremonies.
tried to control demons. What do you mean by control demons for the good of, like make them stop
Well, listen to
harming
season
people?
1
or,
episode.
Like, control them to what?
Okay, if you guys haven't heard this, we covered this in an episode. It was called something like Aleister Crowley and the Beast of Loch Ness, or the Loch Ness.
You don't know the name of it,
I
Jeremy?
can't remember the name of it, but it was a cursed episode that we did. And we talked about the curse of Aleister Crowley, right? And we ended up having to record the episode 2 whole times because we recorded the first one and it was corrupted. The whole audio file, we were sure
cursed.
that it was the curse of Aleister Crowley. It was a weird experience.
It is one of my favorite episodes. I think it was one of the most, well-researched episodes, and really the storytelling was great. It was called The Black Shuck. Oh, that's right. The Black Shuck, Hellhounds, and Aleister Crowley's
That's
Loch
right.
Ness
It was kind of a
Monster.
mixed episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a good episode. But I think that's the point of it was Aleister Crowley took things in a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
He was inspired by these ideas. A lot of people say he was trying to promote these ideas of light in humanity, furthering the divine direction of humanity. But he was using a lot of things, and a lot of his writings, like, did talk about some things that
Dude,
were
look
like
at the
sacrifice.
dude's
And
eyes.
yeah, he looks like a dark figure for sure.
Well, you say this, though, with people. You can't judge a book by the cover.
Dude, he has like black robes in his eye. Like the dude.
Black robes in
Well,
his eye?
he was into the sex magic, the dark black sex
right.
magic.
It's not an episode of Aleister Crowley.
I know, but like, I mean, I just don't understand why the need to defend these.
I'm not
people.
defending him. I'm just, but you can't.
You're like, don't judge a demon worshiper by its cover.
No, I'm not saying that.
Well, he didn't worship. He
I'm saying
was trying to control. Supposedly,
Aleister Crowley is not Helena Blavatsky. Helena
I never said
Blavatsky
he was.
is not Eric von Hockenstein or whatever, but there's similar tenets that they throughout time each of them globbed onto, which is this idea of this council of light that's helping humanity through certain times.
basically the carrying through of these teachings of the mystery schools from ancient Egypt to now, bringing forth this movement and guiding hand behind humanity.
Right,
Whether
that's
you
what
wanna call
they're
it-
saying publicly, that this is what they're telling people, like writing down, like we are trying to do
Well,
this.
who and which?
Well, yeah,
That's the thing is there's
Manly P. Hall.
You're talking about three different theologies through hundreds of years of time. They're not the same people. They're not the same theologies.
I'm talking about Aleister Crowley specifically right now.
Yeah, he picked up and used this idea of like hidden knowledge, secret societies, Gnostic teachings, and he used that combined with Solomonic magic, which was the magic to control the kings of hell to supposedly make the world a better
Right,
place.
we talked about that
But
ceremony.
here's the thing, though: if you are, let's just say for speculation that by his actions he seems like he is an arbiter of darkness, and if
Well,
you're an
that's arguable.
Okay.
I mean, no, he's done a lot of dark things for sure.
Let's just hypothetically say that he is on the side of darkness. What does darkness do? They don't tell you the truth. They don't go, we're here to destroy humanity and corrupt humanity. They say, we're bringing the demons to help humanity. They lie. They're deceivers. This is what they do.
I know, but you're jumping into these terms of they and them and
I'm saying anyone that worships like the false
well, first of all,
god.
he didn't worship a false god, quote unquote. He believed in Christian theology. He believed in angels. He believed he was getting a guardian angel to help him to do these certain things.
But here's the
We
difference.
talked about this on our episode.
John hits an interesting point, and it is the division between the idea of like the traditional Christian idea versus the idea of Lucifer.
Well,
right?
and things
So
were different back in
right. What I'm saying
Middle
is
Ages.
It's more binary, but it used to be there was kind of a conflation. It seems like a mix of
do what thou wilt. Does that sound Christian?
Did you hear the rest of it? We talked about this. We're
What's-
going to go
what's
back
the
into
rest
this
of
again.
it?
it's do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law,
Unless it hurts other people, basically.
will under love, or something like that.
Sounds libertarian if you read the whole quote.
Do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law, will under love, or love under will.
This
is what it
guy,
is.
look
his face, man.
Look at
Did you
this
read-
dude? Like, look at his. Tell me that dude is like straight legit.
Well, there's a good chance that he was a megalomaniac and
Well, for sure.
believed a lot of things. Like, I'm pretty sure that some of his rites included, like, whether it was sarcastic or whether it was just hyperbole. He said in one of his books, I'm pretty sure that like the blood of the innocent is the most sacred sacrifice, and whether that means kill or whether that means just take the blood, borrow the blood,
Splitting
and
hairs.
use it in a thing. Whenever you're dealing with that stuff, it's definitely something to be wary of. Whenever you need to
Look at him as
sacrifice
a young lad right there.
Yeah.
He looks very, very nice. Okay, I'm not going to go down this road. It doesn't really matter.
It's another
anymore.
topic, but he was inspired by the idea of the secret knowledge, right? And the guiding of human destiny
Straight out of the Bible.
through the occult mysticism.
What's that to do with anything?
Well, then the seeking of the knowledge, the infinite, like, I want to know everything.
Right, and that's true. I mean, the idea that like, and that's like I said before, that is the division between what we think about Christianity now and the idea of early Gnostics and some other sects that believe that Prometheus, the bringer of light, Lucifer, was enlightening people. There's this division where some people believe that was a positive influence for humanity, and there are people that say like that's a misleading, deceptive quality of the serpent line.
It's important to mention, though, there's something in between that where there's a group of people or a group of ideologists or whatever that believed to push people towards enlightenment was not looking at the Luciferian aspect of it, but we should enlighten people to push humanity towards the best that they could be.
Right, there's all different levels of this, and we are not esoteric scholars by any
Which
means.
we should do an episode so we can actually study it as opposed to just,
Anyways, this is, it's interesting to discuss these ideas and get further down the rabbit hole and hear what you guys out there think, the listeners. What are your thoughts on this? Maybe some people out there have some more deeper esoteric knowledge that they would like to share, which would be cool.
I wanted to end this episode with one reading.
Does this connect with what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, the entire episode, like, there was a really great resource called Finding CountSaintGermain.com with a lot of good detective work that's tracked down accounts, but the comments are interesting. So this comes from one of the comments on findingcountstgermain.com.
My name is Steve Jones from Canada.
By the way, don't fix anything if there's grammatical errors. Just read them as they are.
All right. My name is Steve Jones from Canada. I turn to a vampire anytime I want to. I become a real vampire because of how many people treat me. This world is a wicked world and not fair to anybody. At the snack of my finger, things are made happened. Am now a powerful vampire, and no one step on me without an apology goes free. I turn to human being also at any time I want to, and am one of the most dreaded and respected person in my country. I am now also very famous and rich with the help of the vampire's empire. I get whatever I want. I become a vampire through the help of my friend who introduced me into a vampire kingdom by giving me their email, jamessuccessfultemple45@gmail.com. If you want to become a powerful and a real vampire, kindly contact the Vampire Kingdom on their email, jamessuccessfultemple45@gmail.com. For help, it is real. Contact them today. James Successful Temple.
I like that he ends it with, it is real.
This is one of many amazing comments you can read on this website. Yeah, this was like last month.
It was not. It was January 2020.
Okay, well, one recently in March was just as insane. There was this thread going on about someone who needed help.
Should we email him?
I think we should.
I want to know. So wait, what is he saying? You can become a vampire if you email him?
There's a lot of comments like that. There's also, you can cure your herpes. That's one of the comments on there.
We should get a hold of and have an interview.
Interview with a vampire?
Great idea.
I'd never heard of such an idea.
Interview with a vampire.
That would be awesome, though.
I think we could do that.
It's funny you mentioned that because there was a comment thread that was going on where someone kept saying, well, their screen name was "Someone Help Me Immediately." That was their screen name. So the moderator seemed to keep asking, how can I help? You seem like you're talking about someone getting hurt, very dark things. Then Someone Help Me Immediately on March 13th at 7 a.m. said, I am very glad to speak to you, and I must again use this as an outlet to contact St. Germain and his friends. I am in danger of being murdered by several people if St. Germain does not provide a watched change for my safety and to avoid the continuation of being possessed. The meditation circle has certain individuals pulling off my clothes, which is not okay.
What the hell?
I was also murdered 3 times in a reality shift, which means the first 3 realities have been discarded with negative life course outcomes, and Elizabeth, in parentheses, this is now the possession talking, was switched into a 4th reality for her safety through the terrible experience of death, dying in 3 realities. I'm trying everything I can to get to New Orleans to ask beings for help, parentheses, vibrational beings, vampires, orange-eyed beings, fae-like beings, etc. But it may take a while. If you would like to help, I really need St. Germain to know I've spoken on this channel. Please contact Elizabeth immediately, as God is declaring this watch turning to have the most vital importance in your universe right now.
I feel like if you die 3 times in different realities, you should be able to get to Louisiana. She say like she can't get to New Orleans?
Seems like a lesser task.
Yeah, right?
Seems like a lesser task.
You get killed 3 times. It's somewhere in there you're gonna like be able to get a bus ticket.
Well, and I think it's important that the mediator is like, how are you contacting me through this? This person can write on a message board on the internet, obviously navigate the World Wide Web. Can you not Google directions?
Go to rideshare.com or
it's a mentally probably deranged human being.
Yeah, there's some interesting folk out there.
Guys, we got to wrap this show.
Yeah, let's wrap it. I think a lot of this is some sort of RPG play leaving comments. I'm hoping it's not mentally unstable people. I'm hoping it's people that are just in some sort of online game.
Or it's real.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, there's a lot in here, a lot of information to cover that we touched on the overarching theme of there being this suggested idea, which goes out through history, of a hidden hand, elite brotherhood of knowledge that supposedly has steered the direction of human destiny. Look at Manly P. Hall's writings. We go back to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Maybe.
You get the train at the end.
And we got the train calling us home.
Yeah, we touched on Theosophy. We're just breaching these ideas, which I didn't think the Count de St Germain was going to take us there.
This is a deep topic. I just thought we were going to talk about like a potential immortal with some weird anecdotes, but this goes deep. Yeah, it's a weird, deep subject, and I hope that you guys out there got some interesting information from this. We'll have all the links
Enjoy
in the
your
show notes.
extra long episode.
Yeah. Did we mention we were going to take a break?
Yeah. If you are not going to be a patron, we will see you in August. And for our patrons, we will see you through July.
Yeah. If you're not a patron yet or a member, just go to beliefful.com, click on the Patreon button. And I've said this before, but hang in there. We're also going to do at least one live stream on our YouTube channel to stay in touch with you guys during the break, during this time where we're going to be building up the back end of the show.
But either way, feel free to reach out to us. Email brothers@beliefful.com. Go to our website. Leave us a comment on Facebook, message. We will get to you eventually. Absolutely, we will respond. And if you're sticking around, if you want to head over to beliefful.com, go to the expansion episode. We will be doing Ouija Boards Gone Wild. So we'll see you on the other side.
We'll see you later. Have a good night.
Happy 4th of July.
Goodbye.